Nigerian MSMEs contribute over 50% of the Nigeria's GDP and employ almost 80% of the labor force. This underscores the crucial role an enabling business environment plays in driving business growth. With an enabling business environment, Nigerian MSMEs will fully maximize their potential and deliver stronger impact in socioeconomic terms, such as wealth and job creation. To contribute to building an enabling business in Nigeria, Fate Foundation, Nigeria's leading nonprofit providing enterprise knowledge and enterprise support, expanded its focus in 2015 to include research, thought leadership, and advocacy entrepreneurship in Nigeria.
We launched the Research and Policy Unit of Fate Foundation in 2015 to give us a view on really what was happening in the ecosystem regarding not just entrepreneurship, but with respect to micro, small, and medium enterprises in Nigeria. Our initial start-off point was to be able to have data points that provided guidance into our enterprise training, mentoring, and business support programs. But it then significantly evolved into an opportunity for us not just to understand what was happening in the space to then influence our work, but to also share the information from the data we were getting, have a touch point for research and thought leadership, have opportunities to be able to dialogue with other people in our space who were supporting entrepreneurs similar to what we were doing, and then come together to jointly advocate around issues, policy areas, and program areas that we felt would be able to create sustainable entrepreneurship ecosystem. And so that led to our Research and Policy Unit focusing on research, policy, dialogue, and policy advocacy.
Since 2015, we have developed over 13 reports, such as the mapping study of Nigeria's entrepreneurship ecosystem, the impact of COVID-19 on Nigerian MSMEs, and our flagship State of Entrepreneurship report that was launched in 2021.
Over the last several years, we've conducted landmark research on the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Nigeria. We started in 2015 with a review of the MSME policy environment at the time, and then followed up in 2016 and 2017 by conducting a mapping study of the Nigerian entrepreneurship ecosystem and also a mapping of key players as it existed at the time. In 2018 and 2019, we conducted research to look at one of the critical issues that affected entrepreneurs, which is financial literacy, to understand how we could better help and support financial literacy amongst Nigeria's entrepreneurs. In 2020, given the advent and the impact of COVID, most of our research focus was looking at the impact of COVID-19 on Nigeria's micro, small, and medium enterprises, and also how we could look at certain segments, particularly Nigerian women, and safeguarding livelihoods. In 2021, we launched our flagship State of Entrepreneurship in Nigeria report, doing an entire assessment of the state of entrepreneurs and the entrepreneurship ecosystem along key segment areas. That 2021 Pioneer report is now what we're going to be launching the second edition in 2022 at our policy dialogue. We also started our white papers in 2022, looking at on how to support female-led businesses, and also a second one, which was released a few months ago, on how to support youth-led businesses to grow sustainably in Nigeria. As I mentioned earlier, our research then feeds into the policy dialogue conversations that we have. And for every year since 2015, we've hosted an annual policy dialogue series, each of them looking at parts of the year. So for instance, our last policy dialogue series in 2021 used the context of the State of Entrepreneurship report to provide insight on building an inclusive, cohesive, and sustainable ecosystem. On the advocacy end, we continue to work with ecosystem players, and particularly working on convening platforms like the Nigerian Economic Summit Group MSME Community of Practice, of which we're the key facilitator, to bring other members like us and other people who play across different segments of the ecosystem, from those who deliver trainings, those who provide business support services, those who provide access to finance, research and policy, access to market, and even entrepreneurs themselves and entrepreneurship groups and organizations. And we've been able to work in collaboration with other partners in the space on key policies and bills, such as the recent Nigeria Startup Bill, the Buy Made in Nigerian campaign, and also advocacy bills around taxation in Nigeria. We're very proud of the evolution of our research and policy unit which is now the Faith Institute, which leads innovative thinking and creative platforms to enable idea exchange and problem-solving strategies in Nigeria. Given the strategic role our research and policy unit has played in defining thought leadership and aggregating stakeholders across the ecosystem together, the board of the Faith Foundation last year made the decision to transform our research and policy unit into what is now called the Faith Institute. The Faith Institute is one of the 3 subdivisions of Faith Foundation now that leads innovative thinking and also aggregates platforms to bring together people like us to share, to discuss, to propose, and to advocate issues on policy and entrepreneurship in Nigeria.
We've also hosted 7 annual policy dialogue programs addressing key entrepreneurship thematic areas. Positioning SMEs for growth, how to ensure Nigerian SMEs thrive despite economic headwinds, 2015. Nurturing public and private sector collaboration for entrepreneurship development and growth in Nigeria, 2016. Scaling entrepreneurship, how state-led efforts can unlock the youth potential, 2017. Building sustainable, 2018. From startups to scale-ups, 2019. The pandemic and Nigerian MSMEs, impact, priorities, and strategies, 2020. Building an inclusive, cohesive, and sustainable ecosystem, 2021. On the advocacy end, we have and continue to work with ecosystem players through platforms like the NASG MSME Community of Practice around key entrepreneurship policy areas such as taxation, the Buy Made in Nigeria campaign, and more recently, the Nigeria Startup Bill.
The Faith Institute has come a long way since its humble beginnings in 2015. Positioned at the forefront of driving entrepreneurship policy conversations, the Institute continues to develop data insights, research, and thought leadership material that can guide policy and program design and interventions. Over the years, these reports have become reference points within entrepreneurial policy discourses and within the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Nigeria.
In line with developing relevant data and insights around entrepreneurship, the Institute recently launched the Enterprise Data Map, which is an online platform that provides a holistic overview of key players within the Nigerian entrepreneurship ecosystem at national and subnational levels and across sectors. In line with its thought leadership efforts, the Institute recently signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the Small and Medium Enterprises Agency of Nigeria, SMEDAN, to collaboratively work on data gathering, research, thought leadership, policy dialogue, and policy advocacy for Nigeria's MSMEs.
The Institute also launched the Pioneer Faith Institute Fellows Program this year, which is a program designed to bring together policy experts, economists, and the academia to work to support the policy design and implementation processes that will address key gaps limiting the potential of the Nigerian entrepreneurship ecosystem. Following a rigorous selection process, 6 fellows emerged as our Pioneer Fellows who were also inducted earlier this year.
With regards to driving conversations, the Institute commenced quarterly workshops last year that take a deep dive approach to discuss key policy recommendations and insights from the annual State of Entrepreneurship report, while also providing hands-on practical learning on policy, program design, and implementation.
At the Faith Institute, we believe that a sustainable approach to improving the entrepreneurship ecosystem is through effective policy design and implementation. Our goal is to consistently support that process to deliver impact in the area of entrepreneurship policy implementation by developing data and insights and engaging in relevant conversations and advocacy. At the board level, we are very proud at the ongoing work at the Institute, and we remain strongly committed to driving systemic change within Nigeria's entrepreneurship ecosystem.
With almost 40 million micro, small, and medium enterprises, Nigeria has a dynamic entrepreneurship ecosystem. Despite the challenges within the ecosystem, including a poor enabling environment, infrastructural challenges, the access to finance gap, Nigerian MSMEs contribute over 50% of the Nigeria's GDP and employ almost 80% of the labor force. This underscores the crucial role an enabling business environment plays in driving business growth. With an enabling business environment, Nigerian MSMEs will fully maximize their potential and deliver stronger impact in socioeconomic terms, such as wealth and job creation. To contribute to building an enabling business in Nigeria, Fate Foundation, Nigeria's leading nonprofit providing enterprise knowledge and enterprise support, expanded its focus in 2015 to include research, thought leadership, and advocacy entrepreneurship in Nigeria.
We launched the Research and Policy Unit of Fate Foundation in 2015 to give us a view on really what was happening in the ecosystem regarding not just entrepreneurship, but with respect to micro, small, and medium enterprises in Nigeria. Our initial start-off point was to be able to have data points that provided guidance into our enterprise training, mentoring, and business support programs, but it then significantly evolved into an opportunity for us not just to understand what was happening in the space to then influence our work, but to also share the information from the data we were getting, have a touch point for research and thought leadership, have opportunities to be able to dialogue with other people in our space who were doing, and then come together to jointly advocate around issues, policy areas, and program areas that we felt would be able to create sustainable entrepreneurship ecosystem. And so that led to our Research and Policy Unit focusing on research, policy, dialogue, and policy advocacy.
Since 2015, we have developed over 13 reports, such as the mapping study of Nigeria's entrepreneurship ecosystem, the impact of COVID-19 on Nigerian MSMEs, and our flagship State of Entrepreneurship report that was launched in 2021.
Over the last 7 years, we've conducted landmark research on the entrepreneurship ecosystem in Nigeria. We started in 2015 with a review of the MSME policy environment at the time, and then followed up in 2016 and 2017 by conducting a mapping study of the Nigerian entrepreneurship ecosystem and also a mapping of key players as it existed at the time. In 2018 and 2019, we conducted research to look at one of the critical issues that affected entrepreneurs, which is financial literacy, to understand how we could better help and support financial literacy amongst Nigeria's entrepreneurs. In 2020, given the advent and the impact of COVID, most of our research focus was looking at the impact of COVID-19 on Nigeria's micro, small, and medium enterprises, and also how we could look at certain segments, particularly Nigerian women, and safeguarding livelihoods. In 2021, we launched
Good morning. Welcome to the 8th Annual Fate Institute Policy Dialogue Series on Entrepreneurship. Thank you. On behalf of the Board of Directors and the management of Fate Foundation, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone seated in the room this morning and to our virtual audience. Thank you for making it here and making it here in time. My name is Amaka Wokolo. I head the Fate Institute, and today we're going to be discussing the very crucial topic, bridging the access to finance gap for Nigerian entrepreneurs. Very shortly, we will take welcome address or welcome remarks, and followed by that, we will take insights from the 2022 State of Entrepreneurship report, and we would launch the 2022 State of Entrepreneurship report. And after that, we would have a very first keynote address from a very special someone who I would introduce much later. And we would have the first panel discussion. Followed by that, we'll take a brief transition to introduce a group of very special people, the Fate Institute Fellows. After that, we'll take the second address and we'll have the second panel conversation. Following that, we'll take closing remarks and it'll be a wrap. To now take us, or to now kickstart the meeting formally, please join me in welcoming to the stage to take welcome remarks, the Executive Director, Fate Foundation, Adenike Adeyemi.
Thank you very much, Amaka. Good morning, everyone. You're welcome to our flagship policy dialogue program, which is the 8th policy dialogue series and the board and management of Faith Foundation. I welcome you to our 2022 policy dialogue series. This hybrid event is being organized by the Faith Institute of the Faith Foundation, which is one of our 3 divisions solely focused on research, policy, and advocacy, particularly on matters relating to the Nigerian entrepreneurship ecosystem, with a particular focus on micro, small, and medium enterprises. This year, we had particularly focusing on key themes that are very important to our conversation, and we'll go more into details on that. I know that we have several of our board members joining us online, past and present board members, some of which are already online. But I'm particularly delighted to welcome our special guest speakers and panelists joining us in person and online today. Dr. Doyin Salami is joining us online and is already waiting online. He's the Chief Economic Advisor to the President. Mr. Jonathan Potter is the Head of Entrepreneurship Policy and Analysis Unit at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the OECD. Mr. Sola Obadimu is the Director General for the Nigerian Association of Chambers of Commerce, Industries, Mines, and Agriculture, NACCIMA. Mrs. Peggy Chukuma Unwosu is the Chief Commercial Officer for the CRC Credit Bureau Limited. Mrs. Doyin Bakari, our Madam President. She's the CEO of SAS Textiles and the incoming president of the Faith Foundation Alumni Community. Mrs. Yvonne Johnson, the managing director and co-founder of Indochina. Mr. Isaiah Owolabi, the CEO of EFINA, and Mr. Wilson Erumebo, who is a senior fellow, a senior economist at the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, and also a senior fellow at our Faith Fellows program. And last but definitely not the least is one of my directors at Faith Foundation, Mrs. Sheyi Bella, who is a partner at Bangwan Igodalo. This is the first, as Amaka said, this is the first policy dialogue we'll be having since we launched our Faith Institute Fellows program, and we're particularly delighted that we'll be able to introduce them to you at some point, and you'll also hear from 2 of them. I would like to appreciate our partners and supporters for today, particularly the Bank of Industry, who supported this program, and our hosts for today, EcoBank Nigeria Limited. Thank you for accepting to host us in your very beautiful and dynamic space, and how your team, honestly, over the last 3 weeks has worked intentionally with our team to make sure that we're very satisfied. And in that regard, I would like to invite our chief host for today, Mr. Bolaji Lawal, to please give us some welcome remarks.
Okay, good morning, everyone. On behalf of my colleagues, the staff, management and board of EcoBank, would like to welcome you here at our Pan-African Center. Most importantly, I would also like to personally welcome the chairman of Faith Foundation. Good morning, sir, and welcome so much. Thank you so much for being here. So for us, it's very simple. We would like to partner for social impact. And we believe that there's so much potential in our country. And if we can all come together to see how we can harness it for the benefit of Nigerian entrepreneurs and the larger economy, we would all stand to benefit. So I won't take too much of your time. At the end of this session, we would like to host you all downstairs at the exhibition center. And I think you'd find the experience very refreshing. We have a couple of pictures there. And the title of the exhibition there is called Amazing Nigeria. And it's all geared towards how we can harness the potential of our country. So welcome, and I look forward to learning from all of you, and I look forward to an enriching session with the Faith Foundation. Good morning.
Thank you very much, sir. Another round of applause for our hosts. Moving on very quickly, we'll take the chairman's address. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the chairman, Faith Foundation, Mr. Fola Adiola.
Good morning. Managing Director, EcoBank, Mr. Bolaji Lawal, our president of the alumni, incoming president of the alumni, Mrs. Adeyemi, our Executive Director, all the directors of Trade Foundation, past and present, everybody here. If I didn't order the protocol list appropriately, just forgive me. My pleasure to welcome you to our 8th Policy Dialogue series on entrepreneurship, organized by the Faith Institute of Faith Foundation. Bolaji is such a beautiful place. And the personal joy that I have today is that it keeps getting better, If we thought we did some things 30 years ago, these are Trump Day, and to sit down in a banking environment with generous facilities like this is interesting. I wish you a success. Yes, I guess speakers, particularly our Dr. Doyin Salami, Chief Economic Advisor to the President, and Mr. John Porter, Head of Entrepreneurship and Policy Analysis at OECD, work and experience regarding to this theme. I'd also like to welcome the senior fellows from our Pioneer Faith Institute Fellows, Class 2, of whom will also be sharing pertinent insights today. Launched in 2015, our annual policy dialogue series aims to be the platform that enables innovative thinking, idea exchange, and problem-solving strategies to foster sustainable entrepreneurship in Nigeria. The policy dialogue series is a very delivery platform for this second of our 3 Faith Institute pillars, namely research, policy dialogue, and advocacy. It brings together high-level entrepreneurship stakeholders, such as yourselves, from the public, private, and development sectors to share insights from our data studies and arrive at key agreements and recommendations that spur innovative approaches to entrepreneurship policy design, review, and implementation. At today's program, we will be presenting to you the insights from 2 of our flagship research reports for this year. The first is 2022 State of Entrepreneurship in Nigeria report, which builds on our learnings and feedback received from the 2021 Pioneer report, using the index areas of business performance, skill acquisition, innovation, and technology adoption. Perception of future opportunities and enabling business environment, and that is the last leg. We are proud to note that we were able to expand the index to include coverage of all the 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory, with insights that will hopefully provide guidance for programs, policies, and practices to improve and strengthen Nigeria's entrepreneurial ecosystem. Our second report mirrors the theme of today's dialogue and is focused on bridging the access to finance gap for Nigerian entrepreneurs. Capital is the lifeline of any business, and access to finance was the most important factor that came out as a major challenge area for Nigerian entrepreneurs within our 2021 State of Entrepreneurship in Nigeria report. Our hope is that today's discourse will allow us to improve our appreciation of the current issues regarding access to finance from both the demand and supply side. Share learnings and recommend policy enablers that can facilitate the deployment and successful implementation of financing strategies. Small and growing businesses drive job creation and economic growth, particularly at subnational levels, and are the lifelines of several families and communities. The more we understand them, the better we're able to develop and implement programs that meet their needs and accelerate their potential. In closing, I thank the Bank of Industry for their support this year, and especially appreciate EcoBank team under the leadership of our Mr. Bolaji Lawal, the Managing Director of EcoBank Nigeria Limited, for graciously hosting us at today's event. Again, I welcome you all to the 8th Policy Dialogue Series on Entrepreneurship, and thank you for your kind attention. You're welcome. Oh, the chairman of EcoBank just sneaked in on me. Unfortunately, she's not as successful as she has hoped to. Bola, our Bola Adeshola, welcome. It's nice to have you around. And thank you for your generosity. We are hoping that Bolaji will carry it to the board. And thank you for your leadership at all times. I'm glad to have you around. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. A round of applause for the Chairman, Fate Foundation. Thank you very much, sir, for the welcome remarks. I will now quickly walk through or share key insights from the 2022 State of Entrepreneurship report. We launched the flagship State of Entrepreneurship report last year. And last year, we were able to cover 26 states across Nigeria. This year, we decided to go big and covered all 36 states, including the FCT. And so we were able to survey 8,611 businesses across all 36 states. Majority of them, over 90% of them, we had allocators on the ground getting and collating data in each of the states. I would quickly walk through the 5 indicators. The State of Entrepreneurship report really provides an assessment of entrepreneurial performance in Nigeria. And we're able to do that using very defined indicators, and 5 of them, which I will speak on a bit much later. I would also talk a bit more around business performance and job creation, which are very key indicators. I will talk about dimensioned youth and female-led businesses, what's happening, what we're seeing from the data, and also talk about bridging the access to finance gap. The report this year is a 2-part report that shows, includes a deep dive report looking at the access to finance challenge and showing recommendations on how to navigate the problem. Now, for data overview, what's happening within gender and with entrepreneurship? This year, we found that we had about 61% of our businesses being male-led, meaning 39% of them were female-led. Now, this is not very good news from last year, because last year we had 42% being female-led, and this year we have 39%. So ladies, this is something to discuss, and I'm very excited because we have a rich lineup of speakers and experts who would discuss and deep dive a bit more to share insights around what is happening. But the thing about this is that it begs the question, for us who carry out the research, it forces us to think and ask more questions around what is happening, right? We understand that the economic situation is tough, but then the male-led businesses are also experiencing the same economic situation. So what's happening? Are we saying that male-led businesses are more resilient? I don't think so, but it's food for thought. And it's something that we would like to deep dive and find out a bit more around that. And when it comes to age and just understanding how we play in terms of youth-led businesses and what's happening in that space, we found that majority of the businesses are aged between 30 and 39. In fact, when I saw this, it made me think that we might have to redefine what youth means, because usually we say youth is 18 to 35. And now we're saying that a lot more businesses who are, less than 5 years old, running businesses who are less than 5 years old fall within the age grade of 30 to 39. So I guess that we're redefining what youth means. We also found that entrepreneurs within this group accounted for been tough, but a lot of our entrepreneurs are very optimistic about the future despite the challenges that exist within the space. Unfortunately, enabling business environments, I think understandably, ranked the lowest, and this is the second time in a row. Last year, it was the lowest. Yeah. This year, it is the lowest again. Now, what's happening with states? If we look at states across board, how do they rank on the entrepreneurial index? Can I have the person who is projecting? So what's happening within the states? What are we seeing, right? Interestingly, and I hope I don't get shot for this, but this is what the data is saying. Honestly, not me, the data. Now, interestingly, we have Imo State ranking the highest on our entrepreneurial index in terms of, oh, I see fans of Imo State in the building. Imo State ranked the highest, followed by Bauchi State and Delta States. Then we have Gombe and Plateau States coming immediately after. So these states ranked the highest. Again, for us, this also just makes us ask further questions to say, what is happening within the states? Why is it that despite the issues that we're seeing, these states are ranking high, right? There are a lot of, plausible explanations, things like, oh, the cost of living with the economic situation that we have also impacting the cost of running the business. And so understandably, major cities like Lagos, Port Harcourt, where you have Kano, where you have major economic activities, would be impacted. But then we also do know that we have a lot of development organizations, doing a lot of work and investing in some of these states. And so it'll be interesting for us to also deep dive and find out what is happening within the states. Coming at the bottom or ranking and the lowest, we have Kogi, Santaraba states, and then we have the FCT also closely following. Now let's talk about business performance. We have about 75% of our entrepreneurs noting that they were able to experience growth because they were able to access they were able to experience growth, and I don't have that here, but there was a linkage to access to finance because they were able to access finance. But then the interesting question or the interesting point around that will be, what were the sources of the finance or the funding that they were able to access? Right? Among the businesses that grew, we have 49% of them between the age range of 1 to 5, and 34% of them were aged between 6 and 10. So we have more younger businesses seemingly growing faster than the older businesses, which also sort of points to some of the things we see from our experience at Faith Foundation, working with businesses, particularly because we have challenges. A lot of entrepreneurs have challenges accessing growth financing in that regard. I have just 3 more minutes, so I'm just going to quickly wrap up. When we look at the bridging the access to finance part of it, and this is where the data seems similar, we have 75% of entrepreneurs experiencing growth in the last 1 year because they were able to raise finance. The question is, what were the sources of those, or what was the source of the financing that they were able to raise? Interestingly, we have cooperative societies ranking the highest. And this tells us a lot because we've heard that sometimes it's best to just use existing models instead of trying to import models that don't exactly fit with our climate or the dynamics that we have here. Coming closely, we have microfinance banks, and unfortunately, only 19% of entrepreneurs received any form of funding from commercial banks. When we think of the access to finance gap in Nigeria, it is huge. And I'm very happy that we have 2 strong panels who will be discussing this from 2 very strong perspectives, right? But the gap presently stands at about 22 trillion naira. And this is probably why, despite all of the interventions that we see happening within the ecosystem, it just appears that we're not making a dent on the gap. What are some of the demand side challenges. When we think of the access to finance problem, we're looking at it from two perspectives. One is the demand side and one is the supply side. What are some of those issues? Definitely financial literacy would top that, which is that how are entrepreneurs equipped with the information and the knowledge required to be able to access funding. We have the high cost of borrowing. We have low level of trust in financial service providers, limited innovation in product types and product design for entrepreneurs. We have demand for huge collateral, and we hear this is a very common feedback that we hear. And then we also have limited awareness of tools like the movable collateral registry. For the supply side, topping the list would definitely be the macroeconomic challenges that definitely impacts on the ability for funding service providers to mitigate risks that are associated with funding MSMEs or small businesses and growing businesses. There is a lack of financial literacy on the part of a lot of entrepreneurs seeking funding or seeking finance. We have limited data insights on individuals, entrepreneurs, on individual credit worthiness. And this is something that we see happening a lot, where you're not able sometimes to even identify people because they do not have any digital footprint. And I'll quickly skim through the recommendations. We're going to talk a bit more. The panel would really do justice to this, I promise. But topping the list of our recommendations, we have one, there's a need to carry out detailed mapping of MSME data segments to influence fund design and implementation. If we really want to tackle the problem, we need to map and understand what is happening within the space and understand the several layers and the dynamics that play within the space. Because when we talk about funding MSMEs, we're talking about funding female-led businesses, we're talking about funding youth-led businesses, we're talking about funding businesses in the informal sector, those in the formal sector. There are multiple layers to this and different dynamics around this. And now my time is up. I think the next point I would emphasize on would be technology. We see that technology has played a huge role in transforming the entrepreneurship ecosystem. And so we definitely do think that adapting a technology can be a big and great tool in mitigating the access to finance problem. So I'm going to stop right there. Thank you very much. Those are the key insights from the State of Entrepreneurship report. Now would quickly launch the report, and I would invite to the stage the Executive Director of Faith Foundation, Adenike Adeyemi.
Thank you very much, Amaka. Please, can we give Amaka a round of applause? We've been doing this work for about 8 months, and she has been leading the work end-to-end with the team, with the Faith Institute team, and working with a number of researchers, and recently our Faith Institute fellows who also joined that progress. So thank you. So today we're doing a symbolic launch of our 2 research reports, which are available to be downloaded. So in your program cards, if you flip to the second page, you'll see QR codes that you can scan. And then download there. We'll also be flashing it on the screen shortly. So if you scan the QR codes at the back, you're able to download it. For those who want long form, www.faithfoundation.org/research, and we will get it up shortly. And those who are also sitting in front, there's also QR codes right on our PowerPoints. They're working on the screen, so we'll get that right back up. So to do our formal launch of the program, I'd like to invite our chairman, Mr. Fola Adiola, to do a formal launch. Yes. There you go, sir.
Adenike has already launched it. So she went techie, and this is what we are launching. But for so many of us, behind time, this is what is in here. And it's been done in a very ingenious way. She said there are 2 reports. This report is known as Bridging the Access to Finance Gap for Nigerian Entrepreneurs, which I hear now launch. This is the first report. But so that you don't keep carrying so many things in your hands, this is the second report, okay? And it is known as State of Entrepreneurship in Nigeria 2022, the summary of which Amaka has been giving us in the last 10, 15 minutes. This is that report. So it weighs something. They've used papers because they're always looking to save money that has a lot of weight, but never mind. I hereby launch this, and I also join Adenike to launch this. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
If you please like to wait, sir. I would like to invite Mrs. Bola Adeshola, Chairman of EcoBank, to please join us. Mr. Bolaji Lawal, yes, and Mrs. Bola Adeshola is also an immediate past director of Faith Foundation. Mr. Bolaji Lawal, Managing Director of Faith Foundation, and then Ms. Sheyi Bella, who is part of the Communications and Advocacy Committee that also supported this project. Mrs. Roslyn Onolaja, a member of the Communications and Advocacy Committee, and also an alumnus of Faith Foundation, and Mr. Adiola. So if we can please hold our reports. Okay. Mr. Adiola, please stand up for a second. Just thank you very much, Saz and ma'am. Thank you.
A round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. The State of Entrepreneurship Report 2022 has just been launched, and you can download it. We're saving the environment. Okay, so moving on quickly, I'm just going to quickly grab my program card, FAQ. We would now take the man of the hour, our very first keynote address. And Adenike mentioned his name earlier on. So I would quickly introduce him, and I hope that we're ready to receive him online. Our keynote address or keynote speaker is Dr. Doyin Salami. Dr. Doyin Salami is the Chief Economic Advisor to the Nigerian President. He's a foremost professor of economics and Chief Economic Advisor to the President, Nigerian President. He advises the President on domestic economic issues. I'm sorry, I'll take that again. He advises the President on domestic economy issues and presents views on these issues to the President. He closely monitors national and international developments, trends, and develops appropriate policy responses. He develops and recommends to the President national economic policies to foster macroeconomic stability, promote growth, create jobs, and eradicate poverty, among others. He will be speaking on key economic policies currently in place to facilitate MSME growth and development. Dr. Salami, if you can hear me, welcome, sir. You have the floor.
Right. Good morning to you. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we can.
All right. Thank you very much. A very good morning to you, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the invitation that has been extended to me to speak at your policy dialogue this morning. Let me immediately acknowledge, although the protocols have already been well established, but as I see my bosses there, I should certainly pay due respects. The chairman of Fit Foundation, a very good morning to you, sir, and it's good to see you. The way you look, it's obvious that the Nigerian economy is in very rude health. Mrs. Adeshola, it's good to see you too. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning. What I've been asked to speak to, and I think I'm not sure now, but I think Adenike told me I have 15 minutes in which to speak to issues around access to finance and the current issues. I'm very thankful to you at Fit Foundation for the work that you have done, and I am hopeful that at some point I will get the reports, or I will be able to gain access to the reports that you have just launched this morning. Because one of the key dimensions of my comments this morning is simply the almost non-existence of data around, or enough data around the SME sector, MSME sector, that enables policy design. But I will come back to that. Let me start on the following notes, which would actually almost be a very hopeful note. As I looked at the data that's available, Nigerian startups between 2015 and August this year picked up about $2 billion, just short of $2.1 billion in funding. Now, if you look at that, you could cheerfully come to the conclusion that about $300 million comes into the Nigerian startup ecosystem on an annual basis. And that would, potentially look to be a bright spot. But it's unfortunate because when you look at the numbers and you look at capital importation, Nigeria does about, since 2015, has only done about $7.5 billion in FDI capital imports into this country, which is roughly about $1 billion a year. And what that says is that the startup ecosystem is actually roughly 1/3 on an annual basis of what Nigeria gets in FDI. Now, that should be a major, major, major cause for concern. But whilst the startup sector may in itself be making some progress, the general picture around access to finance across the board, and this is not now an MSME matter, it's across the board, is actually quite difficult. And the key drivers have already been identified. And I would argue that at the heart of it, the macro environment is perhaps the biggest of the drivers. And when you look at the macro environment, Nigeria, like many other countries in the world, is struggling to recover from the impact of COVID and the raging inflationary impact of the Russia-Ukraine war. I'm sure you've all seen the latest numbers on inflation. But our biggest challenge actually arises, I'm trying to avoid some language around whether it's self-inflicted or not, but our biggest challenge is simply that some things are just not in place, and which is constraining access to finance across the board, even for large companies. I will come to the MSME sectors in a moment. When you think about it, even though oil prices have since recovered since COVID, currently Nigeria produces, the last figures for October now show us producing pretty much 1 million barrels of crude oil. Now, at 1 million barrels of crude oil per day, we simply do not have the resource capacity. We are entitled to produce about 1.8 million barrels of crude oil. At 1 million barrels of crude oil per day, it leaves the government in very, very difficult position. And that is why the government has had to borrow and borrow quite significantly. Now, the challenge is this. Part of the borrowing has also been, as this is public information, so I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, has had to be from the central bank, which is where issues around ways and means. But where am I going with this as far as access to finance is concerned? The central bank, in its bid to manage the potential inflationary consequences of the pattern of government borrowing, has had to constrain bank lending. Now, I'm not saying bank lending is the only source of capital. We will come to that in a minute, but I'm just trying to put the macro environment squarely on the table to begin with. That unless we're able to begin a process of rethinking certain things, the ability of the government to fund itself means that where we are today simply accentuates, worsens what is, in my view, an already inadequate model of banking or financial service intermediation in Nigeria. I've argued for a very long time that financial service intermediation in Nigeria, as in many African countries, essentially takes money, gathers money from the private sector and hands it to the government. Now it is even worse. And so to that extent, I'm not surprised at some of the figures that have been quoted as far as access to finance is concerned. So for me, the first and the biggest fundamental challenge that we are going to have to deal with, and which the government is trying to deal with, is how do you fund the government in such a way that it does not become a drag on the rest of the economy. Those of you in the audience who are economists will certainly, if you remember what you were taught in Economics 101, will remember that whole issue around crowding out. Essentially, where we are at, the government is having to borrow, and that level of borrowing is acting as a drag on access to finance across the entire landscape of corporates. It doesn't matter whether you are big or small. The second piece that I should quickly put on the table around the macro environment is that, look, over the next certainly 2 years, the global and consequently the domestic macro environment are uncertain. In our own case, part of our own uncertainty will arise because there's an election coming up next year. But that's not the big issue as far as I'm concerned. Globally, central banks are reining back their balance sheets, and that is leading to higher interest rates. Higher interest rates will doubtless constrain investment. And so the questions around how do we access finance, what kind of finance? And by the way, it will also, I'm sure you have already seen the 2023 budget of the federal government, and you will see the budgets of state governments, as we go along. Forgive me, there is a limit now. Well, there has been a limit, but that limit is now much tighter as to the latitude of the government of Nigeria to do much in terms of, the kind of ways in which it used to support MSME, simply because, sorry, the cash is not there. If you look at the 2023 budget, I think it's about 9 trillion that is projected to be borrowed. If that is borrowed in the domestic market, then you can imagine what the inflationary impact is going to be. All I'm saying to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that the economic backdrop, even though the economy continues to grow, some of the dimensions around the economy mean we are all going to have to rethink some of the models around which we work. As I spoke to Adenika yesterday in a meeting I had with her, I did tell her that, look, what has happened in the last 10 years globally is about to change, is already changing. In the last 10 years, interest rates have been low. Now interest rates are going up. So some of the models around accessing finance are simply going to change. Why? Returns are now higher, and forgive me, the access is going to be a lot more difficult. So that is that on the whole. The second point that I would like to quickly drive, as far as access to finance is concerned, is the point around information. there is a dearth of information, especially to those, I have to now say, those of us now on the policy side, around what the MSME now look like. And by the way, it's changed. It's actually now nano, micro, small, medium enterprises. What do they look like? I was listening as the head of the Faith Academy was making her presentation. And one of the things I didn't find in that presentation, yes, growth is mentioned. Companies are growing. But are they growing profitably, and are those profits sustainable? Because unless we have a clarity about the nature of the balance sheet of NMSME companies across the spectrum and over a period, it's going to be a bit more difficult to be clear about what kind of finance and who is going to lend it to them. An MSME development organization that I sometimes play around with gave me access to their data, which they haven't given me access to quote it, so I'm not going to be able to tell you who they are. But one of the things that I found very interesting about the data they gave me is that when you looked at the sources of finance, 15% comes from loans, 52% come from grants, and only 9% come from equity. Now, that is not a sustainable position. And that's why I raised the point about MSME or NMSME profitability. If only 9% is coming from equity, and by the way, they did not say to me, and that's why, again, as I said, they didn't give me their permission to quote this, but they didn't say to me, oh, their data had, was either randomized or is large enough. I just was looking, desperately looking for what does the picture of access currently look like. And as I said, even though companies are recording growth, there is no information around their profits. There is no information around how their balance sheets look. What we have is essentially something which says access to loans, very bad or very poor. Access to equity, not great either. In fact, access to equity or the deployment of equity, don't let me say access, the deployment of equity is actually worse than the deployment of loans. And more than half of the finance that is deployed are grants. Now, that is simply unsustainable. Why? Sorry, grant givers are not being driven by the same kinds of successful economic imperatives. I'm sure that you all understand. Business, essentially, in terms of funding, it's three things. It's equity, it's lending or debt, and then it's grants. In the normal course of events, yes, everybody would like a grant because you don't have to pay it back. But does that contribute to economic sustainability of companies? Where we are now in real trouble, if what I have been given is any reality, is any reflection of reality, is that we now need more fundamentally to understand how companies in the MSME sectors are funded, not what they say is their problem. We need to understand their balance sheets. We need to understand the balance sheets as they differ across different parts of the growth cycle, how they differ across different segments, because unless we understand them, we are going to be unable to design properly the kind of measures and the kind of policy support that is absolutely needed. And so one of the key things that I would like to suggest that the Faith Foundation team may wish to consider is to see whether you can bring together all the enterprise development organizations that there are. Different people have different data pieces. I remember doing some work for the LSETF, the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund, a couple of years ago. They have some data. It'd be useful to bring all this data together, try and streamline them, and then let, on the basis of the available data. By the way, I hope you can all still hear me. I can't see the I can't see the hall. Am I still audible? Am I talking to myself?
No, you're not. We can hear you clearly, sir.
Okay, thank you. So for me, it's very important at this point that if the Faith Foundation team considers it useful, to work towards bringing all the enterprise development organizations, or at least as many as them, together across the Nigerian spectrum and share data, consolidate data, and enable us see what it is that the profile of companies look like. Because until we understand the profile of these companies, the design of products that will be suitable for them becomes a very difficult one. Now, I think some of the key issues have already been raised as far as the demand side and the supply side. Access to credit ratings. Yes, I know credit bureaus have been created, but again, I was trying to find out information about how much of their material is actually being used, who uses it, and at what cost. In some countries, individuals have credit ratings. And so if we say access to finance, especially debt finance, well, we are going to have to ensure that the kind of data that gives lenders comfort becomes available. But for me, I think what is now an imperative is, how do we get equity? How do we get those who are running these companies to put in real equity? Because if, as I said, the data that I gained access to shows only 9%, it actually doesn't make sense to me, because I somehow think it is wrong, because it can't be 9%. Why? Because if you're starting the company up anyway, you've got to put your own cash in it, no matter how small it is. And it's striking to me that at 9%, it's remarkably low. But if that is correct, subject to the caveat, but if that is correct, then we really do need to work hard at that. But I think perhaps the biggest challenge that MSMEs or NMSMEs face, and this again draws from some of the work I did whilst at the business school, is their ability to convince capital providers that they indeed understand the markets in which they work. In my view, access to finance is not independent of the capacity of NMSMEs to manage their businesses successfully. And again, that goes back to the theme that I have been, really emphasizing, that how profitable, how successful really beyond growth are these companies. Because you've got to be able to show that you not only understand the business that you're running, but you're running it successfully. I remember being at the business school then, and some of the work I did, especially around equity contributions, shows that, forgive me, many MSMEs have, in terms of the work that organizations like Faith do, really need very significant support, even to understand the fundamental dynamics of running a business in a market setting. And so my view is that the macro environment is difficult, will be difficult for at least the next 2 years. The policy environment, as far as the government is concerned, in terms of, the government's put quite a lot of money. In fact, I was surprised when I looked at the data that you're looking at the best part of 1 trillion. If you look at all the central bank interventions across about 5 or 6 different areas, indeed, as I said, my surprise when I'm just trying to pull up the data on some of the stuff, that, in 2020 alone, commercial agri schemes, 672 billion, anchor borrowers, 497 billion, SME rediscounting and refinancing facility, 300 billion. Between those 3 alone, you're almost talking at about 1.5 trillion naira. But there's a big caveat here. 1, all these monies, were they disbursed? Second, has anybody done an impact assessment? Which, again, so beyond the MSMEs must be able to show themselves to be profitable, all these interventions on the part of government, have we done any work that tells us just how successful they were, so that we know which ones succeeded, which ones didn't succeed? And by the way, let me say this, as I sit now on the government side, I think the challenge around impact assessment will have to be on your side. Forgive me, it should be on our side, but hey, life happens. If you guys want government to support things, it would be useful to be able to tell the government what has worked and what hasn't worked. And it's very, very, very important. So let me summarize what it is that I have said to you this morning. First, access to finance has been, will continue to be challenged, at least from the macroeconomic environment. Because as I say, on the macro side, we are going to see higher interest rates. We are already seeing higher interest rates. And in my view, higher interest rates are going to continue for a bit, whilst the world works out what to do about the challenge of inflation. Second, the government of Nigeria, as you can see from the 2023 budget, is resource constrained at this point. And now, please, I'm not going into a discussion around what we should have done about subsidy or not done about that. All I'm saying to you is the facts as they stand on the table are these. The government is projecting to borrow about 9 trillion plus next year. And therefore, its resource capacity is rather limited. And there are some reforms that will have to happen in order to rebalance the economy and make it more stable. Now, the approaching elections don't make those reforms any easier to do. And by the way, as we know globally, when an election is coming, you should expect international capital to stay away from the contest. So that's the first thing, that the macro environment is not easy and it's not going to get any easier anytime soon. The second is that any which way we look at it, the available information around the NMSME sector, forgive me, I'm always trying to remember that acronym. The available information, especially around company profiles in terms of their deployment of finance, needs to be strengthened, needs to be improved significantly. We always hear data around growth, revenue growth, and I think that is precisely, essentially what we are being told. But it's important to also understand what the typical balance sheet looks like across different profiles, growth profiles, sectoral profiles, jurisdiction profiles. We need to understand what these companies look like and to what extent are their profits and positions sustainable. Thirdly, as I've also said, it's very important that as we go along, organizations like the Faith Foundation have to collaborate with other similar organizations to pool the data that they all individually have into some sort of collective data that enables us, appreciate in more granular version some of the characteristics that we are trying to understand. But it's also as important to understand the impact of what has happened, what is happening, what has been done, and what may even be proposed to be done. As I said, just looking at the data around government intervention schemes and central bank intervention schemes, you're probably looking at the best part of 2 trillion naira since about 2019 or thereabout. But the key question is, if 2 trillion naira has gone out, how effective has it been? What has worked? What hasn't worked? What couldn't work? In my view, these are fundamental questions. And as I say, please don't berate my colleagues and I. All I'm simply saying is that you guys ask for intervention. You do get intervention, but nobody comes to tell, at least not someone like me, what has worked, what didn't work, or indeed, whether the figures that we are even quoting and saying, oh, this is the size of the intervention, whether that's truly what came into these various sectors, and as I say, what's the impact. So for me, in terms of the policy discourse, it needs to focus on probably 3 key pillars. One, In the unfolding environment where government resources are limited, what can the government do in terms of policy that would support private provision of capital? Let me reemphasize that in the unfolding environment, what is it that the government can do that will enable, support private capital providers, whether it is equity, whether it is debt? Because as far as I'm concerned, grants are helpful and very good, and we should pursue them with as much vigor as we can. But I'm not clear in my mind that that is the most sustainable option that we should go. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, how can we, as enterprise development organizations, enterprise support organizations, what can government do to help you in the work that you do? Are there any policy measures that would be helpful, either to remove some of what is there that are constraints, or to institute new stuff that would enable the work that you do? Let me make it very clear. The government at this point is resource constrained. As I said, there will have to be some reforms that enable an easing of its resource constraint, but at this point, that is where we are. So what kind of policy measures do you think are needed for the kind of work that you do to support them in a meaningful way? And the final point, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, that I would like to make is a very simple one. To what extent can we, on the back of technology, create unique identification across the board? Because in my view, if you're unable to create unique identification, certainly debt providers aren't interested, and it's not even clear to me that equity providers would be any more interested. And so on the back of existing technology and growing technology deployments, what can be done to create unique identification, create records that can then be used in the assessment of opportunities? Mr. Chairman, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I hope that the comments that I have made are useful and will drive the conversation going forward. Again, accept my thanks for the consideration of this invitation. Thank you very much, and a very good morning to you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. A round of applause. Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you, sir, for really taking us on the journey, letting us know what the constraints are, what the issues are, giving us a background to what the access to finance challenge and problem looks like. Dr. Salami touched on some models. He talked about loans, he talked about grants, and questioned the sustainability or even efficiency of some of these models. Building on the conversation that we have, we're going to have or take our very first panel. And this panel will be looking at designing and scaling access to finance models to bridge the finance gap. So, sir, if you would indulge us, please stay on the line because we have some questions directed at you on the panel. And I already have seated the moderator, the Executive Director of Faith Foundation. I would now hand over the mic as she introduces the other members of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amaka. Thank you very much, Dr. Salami. Dr. Salami and I had a very extensive conversation in person yesterday in Abuja, and a number of the things that he's reiterated, I'm happy that we've talked about that, and it actually serves as a very good context for the panel that I'm going to moderate now. But Dr. Salami, I want to tell you that we accept the challenge. If anything, the last 1 to 2 years, we've been working on trying to review the various funding programs. I'm looking at Teju here because we've had those conversations. I do have to say that the LSETF is that one program and financial program that you can see at government level where there's a level of data, insight, information, and analysis. And that's something that we would work with you on. And so we'll be willing to take up that challenge. And because it's really access, it's for the institutions that oversee these funds, giving us the access to be able to review, to analyze the data and the insights. And we do already work across a number of other enterprise support organizations. So even our State of Entrepreneurship report and our Access to Finance report, the Faith Foundation entrepreneur data is less than 8%, if at all. They cut across ESOs across the country and even non-ESO organizations. So thank you very much, sir. To join me on this panel live in person, I would first off like to welcome Mrs. Chukwuma Nwosu, who is the Chief Commercial Officer at CRC Credit Bureau Limited. One of the things that Dr. Salami had spoken on was the role of credit reporting, digital identity. And CRC is the leading, please have a seat, Nemi, thank you. Is the leading credit bureau in Nigeria, where she leads business strategy development, growing credit information, and they've grown it from over 95% of the Nigerian credit industry, covering financial and non-financial institutions, and she's done extensive work on expanding that. And she will be speaking on the role of credit reporting in facilitating access to finance. You're welcome. Our next panelist joining me is the Director General of the Nigerian Association of Chambers of Commerce, Industries, Mines, and Agriculture, known as NACCIMA. NACCIMA, as we all know, is the umbrella organization for various affiliate member chambers of commerce within Nigeria, including state, city, and bilateral chambers, business associations, and professional associations. NACCIMA champions the cause of business through its advocacy roles and influences public policies that promote free enterprise. He will be speaking on the broad range of challenges and opportunities around access to finance, funding for Nigerian entrepreneurs, and leveraging on insights and experiences from MSME groups. You're welcome, Mr. Obadimu. You're welcome, sir. The next person that will be joining me is, as we've introduced her before, the incoming president of the Faith Foundation Alumni Executive Committee, Mrs. Doyin Bakare. She's the CEO of SAS Textiles, and she's a seasoned entrepreneur herself, leading and running a transgenerational business store chain in Nigeria. She and her siblings have successfully steered the SAS Textiles from a one-room shop to be a leading brand in the textile space, and even transitioning recently into manufacturing. So beyond retailing, they've expanded to manufacturing. And she will be providing insights from an entrepreneur's perspective. So you're welcome. You're welcome to my panelists, and it's great to have you here. We have just about 30 to 40 minutes for the discussions, which will take very brief succession. And we'll take a few questions in person and also online. So I'll be looking to receiving the questions from the online audience. So I would like to start with you. One of the things that Dr. Salami talked about was the role of digital identity. If I'm in the US now, and even if as a citizen, if I have a social security number and I want to engage in any form of lending or financing, whether it's getting the credit card or buying a house or getting a mortgage car, I don't need to know anybody. What they do is plug in my social security number and they're able to get my profile as an individual and also as an entrepreneur. So I would like us to start with what's the role of credit reporting in easing access to finance as a whole. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. All protocols observed. Let me start by saying that in any economy, there has to be cash and credit. For there to be credit, you have to have enough information on people and businesses for decisions to be made. Now, for that to happen, there has to be an institution that takes in that information. And that institution that takes in that information from all sources of credit granting institutions is a credit bureau. Now, one of the reasons why credit reporting is extremely important is because if you do not have history of people, consumers, businesses that have accessed some form of credit, then you do not have information on their previous behavior. And so it remains very, very important, in any economy, in any country where you find yourself, to be able to have access to that information. And one of the challenges that we do have in Nigeria is we do not have a single unique identifier.
Can you speak a bit on that? Because we have BVN, NIN, and all of that. How, and some more coming. So how does that work and link with you getting credit data and the digital identities or digital identifiers?
So currently what we do is we take all these different types of IDs and we do some kind of matching in our system. And so we use various things. We use name, date of birth, and gender. We use form of IDs. And, we use the ID numbers of all the various IDs that we have. And then we try and match people and, match organizations, RC numbers and such as like. And I can tell you that this is a very gruesome task for the bureaus. I mean, if we had one identifier, then it would be much easier to say, so Peggy has a credit card with X Bank. Peggy is a director in XYZ Nigeria PLC. Peggy has access some form of intervention funds and so on and so forth. But we don't have that at the moment. And that is why you see that in countries where they have a unique identifier and countries where they're able to find people in the sense that, you have the data and you're able to map all the person's financial footprints with that particular unique identifier, that it's easier for them to take decisions. I mean, a typical example is, I think in India, there are about 1.6 million people that already have IDs. If we look at Nigeria, thereabouts, or 1.6 billion. If you look at Nigeria, for example, the NIN as of today is, I think, very close to about 80 million. The BVN is less than that. We have international passports. So if I speak for myself, I have an international passport, I have a driving license, I have a NIN, I have a BVN, and all these numbers are different. So once we have one unique identifier that can help us map people, then it becomes a whole lot easier for credit grantors to take decisions. But just in summary, let me just reiterate that what the bureaus are doing is to use all these different IDs and try and map people and then provide credit profiles that credit grantors can use.
Thank you. One last question. You've given some number in terms of those who have NINs, BVNs. Where we sit right now, how many people do we have credit profile numbers for them?
There are over 75 million credit profiles as we speak, and that is in CRC Credit Bureau. Okay. There are 3 credit bureaus in Nigeria, but for us, we have over 75 million credit profiles. But you'll agree with me that looking at Nigeria's population, it's still a far cry. But I can say that we've come a long way in the past 10 years plus. The bureaus were licensed by the Central Bank in 2009. As at 2008, credit to private sector was about 7.7 trillion. As we speak today, in 2022, this is above 40 trillion. So we have come a long way. Even if you want to look at NPL levels have drastically dropped. As at December 2021, it was less than 5%. And this has gone down from about 32% thereabouts sometime in the early 2000s or so. So, I mean, we can clearly see that it's working, but we need institutions that are not regulated by the central bank to recognize the fact that this is working and to provide data on all their credit customers.
Thank you. Thank you. A round of applause, please. And we'll come back to the how to get those institutions come together later. So, Mr. Obadimu, one of the reasons why we invited you here was when Amaka was presenting, she talked about how cooperative societies and groups and business groups have been very instrumental in facilitating
If you look at the microfinance model, it also builds on that because people are de-risked when they come together in groups, and you'll find a lot of funders also willing to provide that risk when they're groups with that. From your experience, because you're the overall umbrella body for Chambers of Commerce, but Chambers of Commerce, Industries and Association, can you give us the perspective from where you sit on how access to finance has been through the chambers of commerce and the bodies on the NACCIMA, particularly for entrepreneurs, for NMSME entrepreneurs?
Thank you very much. First of all, let me say that the definition of that group, MSME itself, is so broad because it ranges from people operating on cottage level to, if I understand it perfectly, from multilateral agencies, definition, any project worth less than $1 million is actually classified as a non-large or as an SME. So that means we are talking about investments ranging from 0 to $1 million. That's quite a wide range. But be that as it may, the challenges facing, of course, in our mind and in our subconscious intellect, we know what a typical SME would look like. So from my interaction with them across chamber movement, I found out that yes, access to finance is a critical issue, but there are other issues that are also very important, particularly to those that are willing to put money into these businesses. I'm assuming that, of course, Dr. Salami mentioned 3 areas of financing: equity, debt, and grants. I'm not sure we are so much into grants today. We are talking about a sustainable system whereby you put money into a business and you expect a payback so that whatever comes back can be redeployed to other business to support them. So we are talking about sustainability system that endures. So access to finance is very important, no doubt, but there are also some other critical areas also that are important. There is knowledge gap, aside from the whatever might be the finance gap, knowledge gap about individual businesses that people are going into. If that is also deficient, it doesn't matter how much you put in to bridge the finance gap, that will make so much of an impact. Also, apart from the knowledge gap, is the management gap. If that is also deficient, that is a big problem. You might find yourself pouring money into a black hole. Closely associated to that, maybe not so different, but it could be different at times, will be the leadership gap. If you are a good manager, if you're in the right business, but if you are a bad leader for the business, you may not quite move as quickly or as rapidly or grow the way you should. So if this is the scenario that we are painting, somebody that is willing to support you finance-wise should be able to ensure to be sure that all these factors are positive, that there is no real information gap, management is efficient and competent, and there is a good leadership trait in whoever is promoting the business. I'm going into areas of good governance now that shows that you're not just selling and making money, you are deploying money, those resources the way you should. When you need to pay back, you pay back promptly and not divert the resources to something else. So these are the issues. Then, of course, in as much as Dr. Salami spoke about government, the handicaps that they have, you know, not making so much from crude oil, 1 million barrels, as opposed to 1.8 million barrels, and so on. I personally, I don't buy that. Government should figure out a way to play its role. Government has to live up to its responsibilities. Don't give us stories about $1 million. If people are stealing crude oil, is it the SME's fault? Is it my fault?
Mr. Obadimu, come on.
No. You're asking me about issues that bother them.
Mm-hmm.
These are the issues that bother them.
Mm-hmm.
They are worried about the weak infrastructure and they expect government to fix it.
Mm.
They are worried about this insecurity situation. Maybe you are not. A lot of people are. They are worried about difference in rates, not just, let's even look at the interest rates. You put money into the banking system, you get maybe 2, 3, 5% interest. And then you want to take money out of the banking system, you talk about 25%. Doesn't make sense for anybody. Savings is a form of investment in itself. Yeah. Then we now look at the Forex also, the differential in rates, 440 to 880, almost double. Who survives under that? Some of the SMEs, they are importing machineries, they are importing their inputs, some of their inputs. They need to survive. Now, there is a limit to how much you could reprice your goods and services in the light of higher cost of inputs. We are talking about cost push inflation here. But remember, when we talk about the stagflation situation that we are in, there is persistent inflation, there is a high unemployment, and wages are static. In fact, wages are declining in real value. So how do you marry these things together? You're asking about what the issues that bother them, and I'm being sincere in this. So you can't just say because your inputs are getting costlier, you will just be increasing prices indefinitely. It doesn't work like that. It's not in the Bible. So let us be. So these are the real issues. Let me stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Adam. And even though we had not started to talk about that, you have talked about just the impact on monetary and fiscal policy on business and businesses and how they've been challenged. So even when they're challenged with raising funds, there's also even managing their existing cash flow and how to do it. So thank you. Exactly. Thank you very much. So to the entrepreneur on the panel, we've had different sides of the coin. We've a number of things in the report when we're looking at the demand side challenges was with respect to some of the capacity issues from entrepreneurs and their ability to even, so the ability for them to have the financial literacy, financial management, tech knowledge and experience to be able to run their business finances, but also in terms of even the business side. How have you raised financing for your business? How have you been able to fund your business?
Okay, thank you so much, my darling Edie. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to our chairman. Good morning to our board, and good morning, everyone. I'm really honored and happy to be here today. Talking about how we have raised finance. So we have an organization called SAS Textiles, and it's transgenerational. And I grew up in a house where trading was being done. And it didn't even have a name. It was just called Yara Itaja. And Yara Itaja simply means a house, a room where they sell fabrics. And in that house, I saw customers. I saw cash. I always heard my mother say, turnover, turnover, turnover. I was a very young lady. What is turnover? From working with my mother didn't have staff. We were her staff. We would go to school, come back home, and be her staff. So she would sell fabrics every day because she had a very disciplined husband who wouldn't allow her to travel abroad. She would go to the market every day. So she would turn over her goods. So from that first generation, we had access to finance from friends and family, from cash sales. She had credit sales as well. She had a very big register where she recorded all her creditors. She had proper bookkeeping. At the age of 16, I helped my mother to Because when they come, they'll buy something, maybe it's 5,000. Our money was good then. They were pay in stages. And sometimes she didn't even know how much each person was going on. I said, okay, let me help you to organize because I'm an accountant, and she inspired me to be an accountant, And so I saw integrity, I saw proper bookkeeping. So we're able to raise finance. Now, when we talk about the second generation, so the first generation, my mom died in 1994. So we took over in the year 1995, and we opened our first store in Surulere Super Plaza. Now, second generation, we didn't have any formal training. We had gone to school, but we still did business the way we saw our mom do business. So we still go to our suppliers. But after a while, we knew it was time to change. It was time to upgrade. And we said it was time to go global. And we met with the manufacturers from Austria and Swiss. And in meeting them, we're still doing turnover, Okay, I'm sure you can hear me, okay. Yes. We're still building on our turnover. Now we said it was time to do bank, let's get the loan. But because we had built credibility, I remember somebody talking about AA rating. Yes, Peggy spoke about it. No, before I get to that, the AA rating. So the first time we had to go to Austria to buy goods, it was such an interesting experience. We didn't have much money, but whatever we did, we turned it over as well. Now, because I'm an accountant, we're very prudent. I tell people that you must learn to be focused. Prudence is so important. We didn't focus on the excesses. We're always prying back into the business. Now, getting into international trade, we knew now we needed more capacity. How are we going to do it? Story, access to finance. And I'm someone that runs away from the interest rates. I'm like, how much is our profit that the banks want to take? So I said, no. The banks kept on coming. Oh, we're going to assist you. We're going to help you. In fact, I remember that our host for today, EcoBank, they were actually the first bank we opened in 1996, and they're still part of our bankers. And an interesting story is that we finally, one of our customers finally encouraged us to take a loan. And we took the loan.
Was this from a bank, a commercial bank?
Yes, it was a merchant bank. Okay. Now, but because we were very focused and disciplined, we made sure we paid back the loan in time because we didn't want anything to take our profits. We knew where we were going. Now, the interesting story is that bank went defunct. They collapsed and our money went with them. And so that was like, I said, no more loan. So I told my sister, I called my sister, my MD. I said, no, I think that's all right for now. Now, this is where the AA rating comes in. So our suppliers in Austria, they seem to like that this new generation of young ladies had come into the business. They were buying and they were paying. Remember the first generation of our mothers, the Alajas in Lagos, had made a lot of businesses in Austria to go down. They collected credits, and a lot of companies crashed. So they were very careful. So we came into the scene, and I was in our store in the late 90s, and the company says they've come to do an AA rating. We didn't even know what that meant. But they said they were sent from a company in Austria, and we understood. They did an AA rating on us, and we passed. And that was the beginning of it. And so we took a bank loan only once in the generation of SAS. And so from then, we started international trade. Guess what? Our supplier credits. They would give us goods. I would get a call to supply maybe 500 pieces of fabric. All I do is a phone call, and they supply me. And they don't even ask for money. We have built such a relationship that we now became the go-to for even other suppliers based on integrity, based on keeping our books well, based on doing things properly. So we had, and another thing that I think helped us in access to finances, we must have a good product, have excellent customer service. So for us at SAS, we had built our values of our business on excellent customer service, on hard work, on integrity, and on fairness. I wrote something down. I said we all talk about IQ. We talk about EQ. It's time to introduce the character quotient. It's time to introduce the value quotient. The value quotient is, what value am I bringing in? How come my bankers are begging me to take a loan and I said I don't need a loan for now? Maybe when we want to open our factory very soon. We know that, you know, and of course, you know, there's so many ways, you know, we talked about accessing finance. So, you know, all those things are very, very important. What's the character of your organization? What value are you bringing in? What's your integrity quotient? Are you saying what you mean? When you say you pay back in 1 month, would you do that? So I could go on. No.
Yes, but we'll wait. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mrs. B. And your last point really emphasized what Dr. Salami was saying about the ability to convince capital providers of your viability, because they would not give you suppliers credit if they thought that you are not good for business. Thank you. Dr. Salami, I hope you are still with us.
I believe so too.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Yesterday, we were delving into something that we looked a bit in our report, and that was regarding the movable collateral registry. So a number of entrepreneurs, part of their challenges with accessing commercial credit is with respect to collateral, particularly if you look at the earlier stage. And so we thought that it was an important point to explore, because this was something that, you know, there was even a bill passed in terms of setting up the movable collateral registry. So I wanted to get your view in terms of the role that platforms and that initiatives such as the movable collateral registry can play, but also the potential challenges that it may have. Over to you, sir.
Well, I would actually have imagined that perhaps Mrs. Nwosu might be better placed to respond to that, because they are the bankers. On the policy side, the idea was, and I would imagine remains, that, you know, to ease the burden of the types of collateral by creating a law that enables movable assets to be deployed as collateral. And so what would be interesting, and again, drawing from our conversation yesterday, is to understand to what extent this act has stimulated access to credit. If it has, it would be good to know. If it has, and that again goes back to my point about impact assessment. When policies are made, when legislation is made, when guidelines are given, those who are affected should, in my view, be willing to say, okay, after a point in time, is this working or isn't it working? But please forgive me. I would like to go back to some of what Mr. Obadimu has raised. Well, I'm not going to join issues about who is stealing crude oil or not, and whether he buys the story or not. I think the data is there for everybody to see. I am a realist. I play with the data as I see it at the point in time. At this point in time, we're all familiar with government, with the constraints to government. We can talk about how those constraints should be eased, but believe me, these are now issues that are attracting, you know, in my view, significant interest within the government. And we're beginning to see some progress, but the progress needs to be, you know, much faster. However, there are a couple of points that he has made that I think is important to, you know, really explain. He did make the point validly about inflation being cost push. Now, the challenge globally is that cost push inflation is now being addressed from the demand side. And the reason is very simple, because they also raised the point about low wages or static wages, that if inflation continues to rise, the real value of wages and spending power continues to go down. And so to that extent, it becomes an
technology.
Hello? Can you?
We can hear you, sir. Please go on.
Looks like the technology. Now, so to that extent, it becomes an imperative that inflation must be dealt with. And globally, we are seeing that being done essentially by short-term demand-side management policies. Interest rates are going up. That's simply the way it's got to be done. One thing, though, that everybody has to understand is that the way a policymaker now like me would look at inflation has to be very different from the way a company has to look at inflation. Every company must know what its own inflation rate is. Your inflation rate is not the national inflation rate, and you need to understand that. If you don't have your records and you cannot look at your own books to determine what your own cost of what your inflation numbers are, then you really need to strengthen your accounting and information management systems. But the real key point to draw about inflation and what it means for companies is that in my understanding of it, and I think I've spent 30 years understanding inflation, in my understanding of it, in a tight period like this, inflation for every company indicates the amount of downward cost pressure that you must exert within your organization to remain competitive. By the way, I hope you can all still hear me because it looks a bit
Yes, we
frozen.
can.
Okay, thank you. Forgive me. It's the amount of pressure that every company must, whatever your own corporate inflation number is, especially if you're in a competitive sector, in a commodity sector in particular, you're going to have to find innovations, ways of reducing your costs in such a manner as to remain competitive. Yep, I am not saying, and I am not failing to understand that, there is a limit to which you can, if I use a slab of meat with bone, oh yeah, so you strip out the fat, then if you get to the bone. But the key question is, and which goes back to my earlier point about being able to see the profile in terms of corporate balance sheet, whether it's the P&L, the average P&L, the balance sheet, the cash flow statement, to see if there are any inefficiencies. Because the fact that there is inflation, you are going to deal with it on two sides. Most companies started on the demand side. And what did they do? You saw companies repackage. We moved to bulk breaking. They were moving to, smaller pack sizes so that people broke up their transactions. Now, that's one level. But now, given the persistence of inflation, you're going to have to now look at your supply side. Because on your supply side, you're going to have to begin to ask your vendors, are these the best prices that we can get? Because any which way, at the heart of it for the corporate, for me as a policymaker, we deal and will deal with the aggregate and say, okay, let's put pressure here, and try and take it down. But the corporate response has also got to understand the imperative of innovation and the imperative of cost management at periods like this. And for me, that is, very, very important.
Thank you very much, Dr. Salami. So, Mr. Obadimu, how do we help entrepreneurs to better understand the realities of the environment that they're working in, but with specific lens to the businesses or their sectors and their value chain? Because even if our macroeconomic outlook is relatively speaking, the business cannot grow beyond the environment and the market that it's targeted to serve. So what are the roles of those that support and enable entrepreneurs in better guiding them on the metrics that will help them to make the business decisions and map out whether they're viable businesses?
Let me put it this way. It's important in moving forward for small businesses generally to embrace, to operate on a more transparent level, to be more open, and to be more sincere generally in their operations. If they do that, my own advice to lenders, to small businesses, is to also adopt a more of a partnership approach in dealing with them. That is when you are lending to them, make it let the two work hand in hand. Let grow together. Don't make it too dry. A lending process. I'm giving you these. These are the terms of the payback. Is there any moratorium? Otherwise, amortization period. No, don't be too clinical about it. Make it a bit more compassionate. If you need to encourage them, depending on the level they are operating on, to have a more realistic board, including a member of the financing organization, please do so, at least until such a time as, till the company is able to pay back all its loans. The presence of an external person on the board, it's very useful. You will see things more dispassionately. They should be more open to that, not to attempt to bottle up everything within the family or within themselves. Even when there is no lending per se, having an external pair of eyes on the board can be very useful. If this is done on a very sincere level, I think it will pay everybody well. It will be good.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And then, Ms. Peggy, I'm going to go to you. When you commented the first time, you spoke about the role of that there's more collaboration required in enabling and facilitating the data exchange that would then give you the insights. Can you speak specifically to what can help CRC and the other credit bureaus do their work better and bridge that supply-demand gap?
So the first thing, and I talked about it earlier, was the unique identifier. That's the first thing that would help. The second thing that would help is that we all know that besides the financial services, there is some form of credit that is happening in other sectors. And so if we have all that data, then it's easier for us to be able to provide as much information on consumers and businesses as much as possible. So I'll give a typical example. Earlier on, I talked about having a credit card from a commercial bank. I can also do borrow me credits from a telco. And that is good information, because if I borrow, top up, and I pay back on time, that's useful information. If I am a distributor, for example, from an FMCG company, and I'm doing well, so they give me products and I take it to the market and I sell and I pay them back, that's also useful information. And so there's so many other sectors out there in the Nigerian economy that are not regulated by the central bank. And it is only for them to see that, credit reporting is important, not just for their businesses, because it helps them with things like receivables, but it also helps their distributors to begin to build credible profiles that enables them to have access to other forms of credit. So it remains very, we are actively working with other sectors at CRC. We have over 2,000 institutions that interact with our database on a daily basis. We know that as of today, we have about 29 commercial banks thereabouts and maybe about 900 microfinance institutions. So we can see that all the other businesses that are accessing the system are from other sectors. But we need more of that data, because there's so much data out there about people and businesses that will be useful in decision making.
Thank you. I also wanted to say the second panel that we're holding will delve more into technology, the linkages and the platforms for that. My final question for you is, how aware are entrepreneurs of the ability to use this to facilitate their getting funds?
So like Amaka mentioned earlier, literacy is still quite low. And thank you very much for having us here.
What are you doing? Yes, about that.
Because this gives us the opportunity to talk a lot, about what we can do to help MSMEs, in their credit reporting. Credit reporting in this sense is not just about them understanding their own credit worthiness, as being reported to the Bureau, but also the ability for them to also report their own credit customers also to the Bureau. And so we have several programs. I mean, we have our corporate sustainability project called UN Credit. And this is something that we, send out on a quarterly basis. And we ask everyone that has access or not even access credit in Nigeria, to take part and listen in. And, we invite notable speakers to come and talk about the different opportunities that the SMEs have in accessing finance and how it relates to them as human beings. Apart from that, and apart from other speaking opportunities, one of the things that we've also done, and this is in the light of technology, and people having access to mobile phones, is to deploy a mobile app. And so with our mobile app, anyone in Nigeria can have access to their own credit report. And so all they need to do is download the mobile app. It's CRC Mobile, and it's on, Apple Store and Play Store. And they can, within seconds, have access to their own credit worthiness. And for us, that is the first step, really, to understand what is being reported about you. If you feel that there are errors, take immediate steps to rectify, so that it's not at the point where you have a business opportunity,
but then you realize that,
you have challenges.
Okay. But the awareness is a challenge. And I think it's even more of a challenge the lower you go down the SME category.
Absolutely,
yeah.
Absolutely.
So more work.
It is continuous, but there's more work for us.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then last question, what do you think that access to finance providers need to better understand from the entrepreneur's perspective?
To understand.
Better understand.
They need to be able to empathize with us.
But their money is for a purpose.
Yes, I understand. So they need to understand our challenges. They need to understand that the buying power of consumers have reduced tremendously. Spending power is limited. But we're in a very interesting environment, where people want good things at a very low rate. We look at the rising cost of the Forex. So what do? As a business, we've chosen to be resilient. We've chosen not to give up. I remember, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, my MD sent a message that, oh no, she's not going to do it anymore, that we're losing a lot of money from the rising exchange, But we have had to ask our suppliers, for more discounts, So for us, the way our the bank providers can help us is the stringent conditions, So I'm talking on behalf of entrepreneurs now, yes. Stringent conditions, it needs to be lowered, And once people have, like Mr. Adola said something at the beginning of the meeting, said capital is a lifeline of any business. And access to finance is so important, At the same time, we must build good track records. So they should be able to partner with us in ways, that we can easily access finance. They should be able to partner with us in ways that, we can develop our teams, add more value, personal development, do things like this. That's why I always recommend be members of a good alumni community. I like to always tell my faith story. I mean, we were just one store then, and we knew that there was more. We knew that people were asking for our franchise. We knew that people wanted us to grow, but we were so limited. But it was until I attended the Emerging Entrepreneur Program. Personal development for me is so important, Personal development. Once you're financially literate, you'll be able to negotiate your loans better. You will be able to know when to buy Forex and not when to buy. You'll be able to know what bonds to take. You'll be able to know what financial instruments I can invest in. So it's not about, I tell people that once you want to borrow money, use it for the purpose for which it was intended for. It's also about being financially disciplined. So people should understand that we need to be financially disciplined as well. Suppliers credit has kind of helped us, but for working with the banks, it's so important that we talk about prudency, talk about the high interest rate. I don't know how the high interest rate, it needs to come down. So when they take money from us, fixed deposits and all those type of things, they give us low rates. Then you want to get money back, you have to go and build your grandfather's property and all those type of things, So for us, bank rates are too high, it takes away our profits, and so we've said we must always have structures, good record keeping. So for us, I've always worked with consultants, have our auditors, record your expenses, have a board, be accountable, have good corporate governance. Those are the things that help us. Your financials must be up to date, have your good business plan. So it's a two-side coin. Yeah, yes, it's a two-side coin. So people will say, oh, they'll come and meet you, they want to buy. I say, no, I'm not a bank. Go to your bankers. Your bankers, but because they've not done things well. It's like a case of somebody that was giving school fees and he went to invest it in MMM. I've heard a story, so people borrow money and they don't use it for the purpose. You're taking a short-term loan for a long-term project. It's very important we talk to ourselves, and relationship is so important. Relationship, central bank interventions, there's so many grants out there. There are actually a lot of other sources of finance that we can look into that has helped us as an organization.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. So in rounding up this panel, we were totally out of time. I think emphasis has been made on several things. The macroeconomic outlook is not positive, and so availability to capital is even going to be more restricted. There was a joke that we had internally within the alumni community that typically in pre-election year, there's a lot of grant financing available. This is a very unusual one. So that also shows you the environment that we're in. There's no free money out there. And even for whatever capital is available out there, it's important that it's also a limited pot, and the business that is able to show the better financial viability trajectory will probably be more aligned to it. What you've emphasized is also the importance of better understanding, and I think Dr. Salami also talked about that, even in terms of understanding the businesses, the segments, the different sectoral dynamics, and those sectoral dynamics also create opportunities to look at financing models. So the way you would finance a school, for instance, and a type of school at a certain level is also different from the way you finance your type of business within the retail space. We've talked about the role of data, technology in bridging the identity gaps, because they better allow the financiers to profile the entrepreneurs and then make those lending decisions. And then last but not the least is also the role of the entrepreneurs themselves in putting in appropriate governance practices, building their financial management skills, making sure that they have the structures around that. So thank you very much. And please, a warm appreciation to my panel. And also thank you very much, Dr. Doyin Salami, for joining us online. We really do appreciate it. And this panel is over. Thank you very much. Over to you, Amaka.
Thank you. Another round of applause for our panel speakers and our able moderator. Thank you very much. We're going to quickly move and very swiftly because we're not doing so good on time, but have we been learning? A lot of insights shared? Okay, so now we're going to take a brief break and just learn more about the Faith Institute Fellows. So earlier on, I had mentioned that this year, we launched the Faith Institute Fellows Program. What's this program about? So we're going to play a very short clip that gives us more information about the Faith Institute Fellows Program. Are we ready?
The Faith Institute Fellows Program is designed to bring together policy experts economists, and the academia to support policy design, review, and implementation processes that will address key gaps within Nigeria's entrepreneurship ecosystem, using research and policy engagement strategies. With Nigerian entrepreneurs accounting for almost 40 million micro, small, and medium enterprises in Nigeria, and with these MSMEs contributing almost 50% to the nation's GDP and employing almost 80% of the labor force, Nigeria's entrepreneurial dynamism is not in question. There are, however, gaps within the ecosystem that limit the potential of these MSMEs. These gaps can be addressed through effective policy design and implementation. The launch of the Faith Institute Fellows Program is our approach to build on driving thought leadership and policy advocacy efforts around entrepreneurship in Nigeria, with the goal of supporting the government and other ecosystem players in the area of designing sustainable policies that will drive institutional change and deliver measurable impact within the ecosystem. Following a rigorous 4-stage application, shortlisting, and selection process that started off with 132 applicants, we're very happy to share that we inducted 6 Pioneer Faith Institute Fellows earlier this year.
As many of us know, Faith Foundation is a credible organization that has done tremendous work over the years to support entrepreneurs in Nigeria. And so I saw this as an opportunity for me to use my skills, my expertise, my experience to work, with produce research to support entrepreneurs and to see how some of the challenges they face, can be addressed. Also to provide insightful policy recommendations that can feed into the policy process and ease doing business for these set of business owners.
I chose to apply to the Faith Institute Fellows Program because of Faith Institute's focus on poverty and unemployment. I want to see how we can ensure a reduction in poverty levels through employment or through entrepreneurship in the agribusiness sector.
I applied for the Faith Institute's Research Fellowship Program because I thought it was a very strong platform to be able to make a positive contribution to the policies and direction of the government as to how to support SMEs.
Why the Faith Institute Fellowship? The Faith Institute Fellowship provides me a great opportunity to contribute to the growth and development of startups and MSMEs. Nigeria.
The First Institute Fellows Program offers a robust opportunity to research and provide insight into entrepreneurship development that positively impact the Nigerian entrepreneurial ecosystem.
I am proud to be a Faith Foundation's fellow because it gives me a platform to influence policy, especially within the entrepreneurship space in Lagos State and beyond.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a brief on our Pioneer Faith Institute Fellows. And so I would quickly invite 2 of our fellows who we have in the room this morning to speak very briefly, sharing a 5-point agenda to drive entrepreneurship growth in the new dispensation. Coming up first will be Jonathan Ikeolumba, who will be speaking for about 2 minutes. And I'm watching.
Okay, so I'm doing my first research work is on fashion, and I believe that fashion is a strong good to add a lot of value to society, and it also addresses social problems. So 5 key point agendas to transform fashion, and the first one for me would be to keep with the regulatory intervention. So if you think about the work the government is doing with the Finance Act and with some of the adjustments to the NACCIMA, so I think a lot of that can help the fashion sector build corporate governance within those businesses. The next one for me would be ecosystem policies. So for example, we can think about dialogues. We can have dialogues that are focused on players within the fashion space. I also think another one for us to be tax incentives, whether it's tax incentives to promote local production for those involved in the fashion space, or whether it's tax incentives to help them drive exports of their business. I'm also thinking another thing we could do to drive partnerships would be investing in technology. So think about technology parks, technology hubs that can support fashion ideas. So there's a whole lot around digital fashion. So if the government support with policies or investments in that kind of space, I think that'll be fantastic. And there's something that's also dear to me, which is around sustainability with fashion. And I think that if we think about a policy like extended producer responsibility, we're currently having that with plastic. So imagine for fashion, where those in fashion are also responsible beyond even an outright sale of their products. So we can think about things like using some of the fashion items that have been sold. I think that has a fantastic way to be friendly to the environment and also friendly to the society. Thank you.
Short and sweet. Thank you very much. Coming up next will be Dr. Ayodele Shitu.
Thank you very much. I am actually focusing more on youth-led enterprises in the retail food sector. And it's not surprising that the outcome showed that male-led enterprises is growing, which is what I found out. So I'm recommending that it's imperative for government to prioritize capacity building in this sector. Yes, it's sad to know that many of these youth-led enterprises situate their businesses just by the roadside when several open spaces exist around. So, 2, we need to prioritize incubation spaces. 3, mentoring is important for these youth-led enterprises. Very, very important. 4, we are in the era of climate change. It is real. Green consciousness, I observe, is missing. So how do we inculcate green consciousness into these youths? And finally, access to financing. Many of them are complaining about financing. And that's one of the reasons why I actually prioritize attending this event. Several ideas are coming up, and we hope to integrate this back into the research. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A round of applause for our fellows. Our fellows are going to be working on thought leadership material over the next 12 to 16 months. And this is really just a snippet of the ongoing research work that is being carried out. So please follow us, stay engaged with the Faith Institute, with Faith Foundation, as we'll definitely be sharing more from our fellows. Now, moving on quickly, we're going to take the second keynote address from our guest speaker. Do I have Jonathan Porter online? So Jonathan Porter will be speaking on bridging the finance gap through sustainable policy approaches. Jonathan Porter is the head Entrepreneurship Policy and Analysis Unit, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. Jonathan, you have the floor.
Hello, everybody.
You can hear me? Okay, great. Thank you.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
A great event. Thank you very much for the invitation. So I'm going to talk about bridging the finance gap through sustainable policy, a policy which is sustainable. Let me go through and show you the structure of what I was proposing to cover with you. First of all, the OECD G20 high-level principles on SME financing. The OECD, of course, has got 39 member countries, but we work with all countries around the world, and particularly we work in collaboration with the G20 very often. So first, to tell you about our principles on SME financing, and then to explain what a strategic approach to entrepreneurship finance policy means, what it means to be strategic, and then give a couple of examples, if there's time, of different policy measures that could be considered. They're just examples. There's a whole menu of different types of policy measures that you could introduce, inspiring yourselves from international practice. And here's just a couple of examples to think about. And then to finish off with some success factors for access to finance programs. So that's the agenda. And now the OECD G20 principles. There's actually been very recently an update. So these high-level principles on SME finance date back to 2015. But in July of this year, there was an update to the principles. So you could have a look out for the update. And the reason that we felt we needed to do an update was because there have been some important changes in the landscape for SME finance in recent years. The first of those is the growth of fintech. This is particularly important in developing and emerging economies because fintech is offering the hope that it may reach out to people who've not been able to access the physical banking system. Of course, there are some conditions that are going to need to be required to make that leapfrog, that jump. But of course, there are new fintech platforms, peer-to-peer lending, crowdfunding emerging internationally. The second big trend is the growth of sustainable finance, and this is aimed at supporting the green transition of SMEs. And in particular, there's a need to support SMEs with their environmental, social, and governance disclosure, ESG. Now, this is a big new trend, and we felt that the principles had to recognize that. The third thing is about the resilience of SME finance in times of crisis, because of course, since 2015, what we experienced was the COVID-19 crisis, and government stepped in very strongly in different countries around the world to support SMEs to weather the crisis with emergency loans and emergency loan guarantees and wage subsidies and all of these sorts of things. And now we have the energy crisis. And so governments are feeling that they need to be able to pull off the shelf measures that would help SMEs to survive financial constraints during times of crisis such as these. The last thing is that we've observed a much greater demand for disaggregated data, for better data on SME finance supply and finance demand. So governments and central banks are working to get better data by region, by sector, by gender of the owner of the business that would help us to design better tailored policies. So this is the environment, the changing context in which all of this needs to be introduced. Now, there are 14 principles in our document. I will not go through all of the 14 principles. I've highlighted two. There's this slide and the next slide. So I've put a box around one of them here. The reason this one has got a box is because it's to do with taking a strategic approach to financing. And this is about the importance of identifying SME finance needs and gaps and building an evidence base. It's about finding out the extent to which SME finance needs are met and where the gaps exist. There are many other principles here, and overall what it's showing is that you need a portfolio of different interventions. You need regulatory simplification, financial literacy training, you need loans, but also non-traditional financial instruments like asset-based finance. So these are what some of these other principles are stressing. And then the last one that I put a box around is also another key part of developing a strategic approach to policy. rather than having a collection of individual measures that don't relate to each other, have not been designed in relationship to each other. And this last principle is about monitoring and evaluating ex ante, ex post, the impacts of the measures that are taken. That's something for you to consult if you wish afterwards, the principles. And here's a slide where I've tried to show the components of a strategic approach to an SME finance policy, or they could be seen as the steps that you need to take. So the first thing is to build the evidence base, and that's reviewing the finance gaps, the existing finance tools, the financial infrastructure, the regulatory frameworks. You need data for this, and you need stakeholder consultation. So that's the sort of first thing. The second thing is to prepare a document, to prepare a written document that's a strategy that it's targeted on what you're going to do to fill the gaps, the most important gaps, because there's prioritization involved here as well. What are the overall objectives? What are the measures that are going to be taken? How are we going to measure whether there's success? The key performance indicators, the KPIs. And then we've got the implementation plan for the strategy, the lead roles, the targets to be hit, the timetable to be met. And the final part is monitoring and evaluation of the policy, not just how access to finance needs change, access to finance changes, but also the impact that the policy measures are having individually. And this requires impact evaluation. And that requires having control groups, the groups that are supported and the groups that are not supported. And the OECD has a framework for the evaluation of SME and entrepreneurship policies, which can be used as guidance for that part. And of course, it's an ongoing process, all of this, and you feed the evaluation back in, and you do another round, and you consult with stakeholders on an ongoing basis. So it's great to see that that's actually really happening here in this policy dialogue today. Then I think that it's important to say that there are only, very few examples of dedicated access to finance strategies for SMEs. That's not what you tend to get. What you tend to get are overall SME and entrepreneurship strategies in a country. And those strategies then will often have an access to finance pillar. So we would recommend that you use that approach in Nigeria. Here's an example from Spain. They've got a strategic framework for SME policy. It's informed by an assessment of the policy landscape, an analysis of policies, stakeholder workshops, and a consultation with the SME State Council. And there's 7 pillars. One of the pillars is on financing, a range of policy actions as you'd expect, diversifying financial sources, promoting alternative sources like hybrid instruments, like mezzanine finance, like factoring, strengthening the credit guarantee scheme, monitoring late payments by the public sector can be a late payer. So that's an initial first step that the government can take. The private sector can be a late payer too. This can be harmful. And promoting training on SME financing. That's Spain. Here, I'm trying to emphasize the point that there's basically a menu of policy options, and you probably need something in each of these areas, depending on what the most important bottleneck is that your stakeholder consultations and your data tell you are the most important bottlenecks, and you prioritize these. But it's to make the point that you do need a regulatory framework for finance, critical to promote competition amongst banks and other financial institutions to facilitate competition. You need the infrastructure, the movable collateral registries, the insolvency regimes which protect creditors, the credit information bureaus we've been talking about, and then a range of supply programs, guarantees, public procurement, women, entrepreneurship, finance, equity funds, business angel networks. You'll find all of these things in internationally in the different countries, and not to forget the demand side of financial literacy and business advice and consultancy. Those are the possible areas. Maybe quickly a couple of examples. Credit guarantees. Is to consider whether you need to actually boost what you have in terms of guarantees in Nigeria. I know there's an agricultural credit guarantee fund, but is that enough? Many countries have got many credit guarantee funds. Some centralize it all into one big one, but it has to be reaching across a range of different sectors and a range of different company types, and it has to be well taken up, and that's not always the case. So I don't need to say too much about the concept of the guarantee. It's the public sector taking the risk and hoping that the connection will be made between the enterprise and the bank, so that further relationships can continue without the public sector. There's an example here that you can consult, the Korea Credit Guarantee Fund. It's an extensive scheme. It's just one of many countries that are doing it. It's a relatively generous scheme and therefore promotes strong participation by SMEs, covering up to 85% of the loan value or 100% of the loan for SMEs. You have to tinker with some of these characteristics, the fee rates, whether interest rates are capped, and what's the guarantee coverage. There is a danger of actually taking on too much of the risk. There is a danger of keeping afloat non-viable firms if you go too far. Those are in the details. And here's another example. This is an example of trying to improve information flow in the system between the entrepreneur and between the bank, between the two. And it's a credit mediator. You have them in Belgium, you have them in France. It's a person appointed by the government who you can go to and complain that the bank has refused you a loan. And there's a staff, or there's a regional network of mediators. You can go to your regional mediator, you say, I've been refused a loan, and they look at your case. And if they think that you've got a good case, they will go back to the bank and ask them to review it, to reconsider. And they'll say, you should have offered this loan. We're the mediator, we're independent, you should have done it. But often the point is that the business didn't provide the right information. And so, yeah, the mediators encouraging the business to do this. And if it doesn't work, they put them in touch with an alternative financial provider. Now here's the end, the sort of headline success factors that need to be considered in all of this. Number one, share the risk with the private sector and seek to build the private sector, not crowd it out, substitute for it. You should be facilitating innovation, be very aware of fintech products and try to facilitate them to emerge as long as the risk is kept under control. And you can use regulatory sandboxes for this. Provide information. The credit bureaus are very important. The collateral registries are very important. Credit mediation is an interesting scheme that maybe could be tried. And of course, build the skills of the entrepreneur, the training and coaching and financial literacy education in schools and universities. Support a wide range of financing instruments, so equity as well as loans, angel funds, factoring and leasing. And finally, be strategic. And that was what the earlier slides were about. Data collection, examining the policy options, including inspiring from international experience, consulting stakeholders, evaluating. So thank you very much for listening.
A round of applause for Jonathan. Thank you very much, Jonathan Porter, for sharing that, providing that international perspective to the conversation we're having today. We indulge you, or rather, please indulge us by staying online because the panel conversation is coming up immediately after. I have our able moderator on stage already, moderating the second panel, which would focus on bridging the finance gap through sustainable policy approaches, would be Mrs. Sheyi Bella, who is our board director. She actually serves on the communication and advocacy committee, and that's the committee that directly oversees our research and policy advocacy work. And she's been very instrumental in supporting the State of Entrepreneurship report project. So she'll be moderating the panel and she'll be introducing her guests, our guest speakers. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Amaka, and good morning again, everyone. Welcome to our policy dialogue series on entrepreneurship. So yes, I'm going to invite my panel. First, I'd like to invite Mrs. Teju Abisoye. She's the Executive Secretary of Lagos State Employment Trust Fund. Thank you very much. Teju Abisoye is a lawyer with extensive experience in development finance, project planning, execution, monitoring and evaluation of humanitarian projects, government interventions, and investment opportunities. Prior to joining LSETF, where she serves as Executive Secretary and leads the team in designing and implementing funding solutions for business in Lagos State, she served as Director, Post-Award Support of UWIN, where she was responsible for managing consultants nationwide to provide training, monitoring, and evaluation for a minimum of 1,200 awardees annually. Teju will be providing a state-level perspective, sharing insights on policy approaches adopted in Lagos State to bridge the access to finance gap. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd also like to invite Yvonne Johnson. Thank you. So Yvonne is the Managing Director and co-founder of NACCIMA. Yvonne is a strategic thinker with a demonstrated ability to influence change by leveraging innovative solutions. She comes with over a decade of leadership experience supporting executive management on strategy within financial services. She leads NACCIMA, a challenger credit agency that uses advanced machine learning technology to build powerful decision-making tools that unearth unique customer financial data, thereby making lending to businesses easier and data-driven, using data points as smart analytics, financial income, and expense patterns. Yvonne will be sharing about the role of fintech and regulations in easing access to finance. Very welcome, Yvonne. Joining me physically as well is also Mr. Isaiah Olabi. He's the CEO of Efina. Isaiah is a global development expert with 15 years of experience in harnessing public, private, and social sector resources and competence to accelerate economic productivity interventions in Africa. He is the CEO of Enhancing Financial Innovation and Access, which is a financial sector deepening organization that promotes inclusive finance in Nigeria. Athena is renowned within Nigeria's financial sector for providing thought leadership toward achieving financial inclusion and championing the unbanked. Since its founding, Athena has contributed to the increased focus on financial inclusion in Nigeria, convening and supporting stakeholders to develop and work toward the implementation of a national financial inclusion strategy. Isaiah will be speaking from the perspective of financial inclusion in enhancing access to finance policymaking. Very welcome. Thank you, Isaiah, for joining us. We also have some other panelists who are not going to be joining us here physically, but who are online. I'd like to introduce Wilson Erumebo. Wilson is a senior fellow at the Faith Institute and a senior economist at the Nigerian Economic Summit Group. Wilson is an economist with over a decade of experience in research, finance, and advocacy. Wilson's areas of expertise include macroeconomic research, monetary and fiscal policies, industry analysis, education, youth development, and poverty studies. As a senior economist with the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, Nigeria's leading private sector-led think tank and advocacy group, Wilson leads the preparation of its foremost influential report, the NESG Macroeconomic Outlook, which sets the NESG's advocacy agenda for the year. Wilson has anchored several high-level committees, including the Technical Committee of the Nigerian Economic Summit. Wilson was part of the research team that worked on the 2022 State of Entrepreneurship report. I'll be sharing insights called Stakeholder Conversations on the Supply and Demand Side Dynamics to the Access to Finance Program. Very welcome, Wilson. Thank you for joining us online. Also online as well, joining this panel as well, is also Jonathan Porter, who delivered that fantastic presentation on sustainable policy approaches towards bridging the access to finance gap. And so I'd like you to just give my panel a round of applause first. We're already excited at what we're going to discuss today. The conversations in this room have been very engaging, and you know, we're already excited about the conversations we're going to have. Now, we're going to be talking about sustainable policy approaches to bridging the access to finance gap. But I think before we start talking about sustainable policies, I think we need to talk about the problem and to even sort of speak to the funding gap problem. And of course, to help us to speak about this, I think, Wilson, I'm going to turn to you first because you participated in our Access to Finance report in our 2022 State of Entrepreneurship report. And I'm sure we have that, we just launched that. And I think I'd like for you to just talk to us about some of the pain points that entrepreneurs have. Entrepreneurs, of course, on the demand side, demanding access to finance, and also on the supply side from the financiers who have to provide this finance, but probably unable to do so and unable to provide the requisite funding required for MSMEs. I don't know whether you want to just talk to us quickly about that.
Yes, thank you very much for having me, and I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay, and I'll stand on existing protocols. So one of the key things that the report showed this year, especially the aspect on access to finance, is the fact that access to finance is still a major challenge for many businesses, particularly for small businesses, and in fact, it ranked among as the top most problematic factors, that in doing business in Nigeria. Last year it was I think number 4, but this year it moved up to number 1. And as you go up the ladder in terms of business size, you would get to find out that access to finance improves, which means bigger businesses are able to access finance, and the smaller ones, bear a lot of the problem. And also, when we did the survey, we looked at 8,600, over 8,600 businesses across Nigeria. One of the key findings is that 63% of these businesses said they were able to raise finance in the last 1 year. And 63% actually looks like a high number, but when you delve into the type of finance they raised, you'd see that 74% of these businesses said they were able to raise personal savings and funds from family and friends. So when you then look at the institutional sources, which of course is very important for business growth, you'd see that just 38%
percent of these businesses were able to raise loans, 14% grant, and then equity had a share of 3%. So in terms of the institutional sources, so we have a case where cooperatives basically account for the largest share, and then microfinance, and followed by commercial banks. And for those that haven't been able to raise finance, which basically links to your question on the demand and supply side problems. So what we find is that majority of these businesses cited, high interest rates as one of the big problem, and also lack of collateral, and perhaps huge collateral demands from financial institutions. Now, moving on to the supply side aspect of the problem. So with high interest rates, we've seen the MPR. The MPR, has been increased several times this year by the Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank, currently at 15.5%. And when you look at the lending rates to businesses in particular, you realize that, lending rate as at October, last month was 28%, according to data from the CBN. So it begs the question, how many businesses can go to the bank, raise money, and still make profits, with these kinds of high interest rates? We also have the CRR at 32.5%, which, you could argue that, and Ways and Means also, which latest figure shows it was about 22 trillion naira, the amount that CBN lends to the federal government. And you can argue that these two factors basically crowd out investment from the private the sector. We've also seen treasury bills rates and other instruments rates have gone up significantly. So it's more like a trade-off between, do I lend to businesses with high risk, or do I just put my money in these and invest in these instruments? So moving on to another supply side challenge, which looks at the poor coverage of government programs, and also sometimes the lack of seemingly synergy across some of these programs. You'd find that we have so many programs, from MSME Survival Fund, CBN Development Fund, SMIDAN's CGS scheme, JIP program, Anchor Borrowers. It almost seems like every government agency wants to basically come up with their own initiative to show that they are supporting businesses. But then, so this creates a problem of synergy, cooperation, and also ensuring that we have a common goal of supporting these businesses. And Dr. Salami mentioned a very key point on M&E. And Dr. Salami, who, by the way, is also my boss and one of the people that asked me to do a PhD. So I think I'll just say a few things about that. And one of the key points he made is that have we really done M&E on some of these government programs? And in the report, one of the case studies that we cited the case of the Commercial Agri Credit Scheme, which was introduced in 2009 by the Central Bank. And an M&E study was done on this scheme. And quite an interesting finding to see that, 29 billion naira, and this is from the report, which was actually published by the Central Bank, 29 billion naira, of the fund was actually applied to areas that were not intended under the scheme by 19.3% of the beneficiaries. So it tells you that we have a wide gap, right? And then lots of initiatives by the government, but then how much of these monies get to businesses that actually need them to survive and grow in line with the objectives of this scheme? Some other issues that businesses cited were limited innovation products, especially on the side of the banks. How much of these products do the banks take in terms of considering the informal nature of these businesses, inadequate knowledge of the MSME space, and also moving on to the demand side quickly because of time. They cited, issues relating to.
I'm just going to say because of time.
Absolutely, I'll just conclude in just 1 minute. They cited issues relating to limited assets, to meet collateral demand, and this is particularly interesting because the collateral registry initiatives, which was set up, a few years ago, when it was passed, I remember I was in Tunisia, and there was a whole lot of excitement in the meeting that I was that, oh, this is going to be a game changer, but we decided to look at this squarely and found out that just only 20% of businesses were even aware of these initiatives. So 80% of these businesses were not, aware of these initiatives. And if you are not aware, how do you then, how are you able to leverage the opportunities that it brings? This is also amongst many other demand factors that have been raised so far. And I think one last interesting point is that all of these factors, is what has led to this wide finance gap that we've seen, which the IFC estimated at $158 billion. And Amaka mentioned, 22 trillion naira. So if you look at the commercial banks and how much they lend to the private sector, in 2021, it was 22 trillion, right? Only 0.38% of that figure went to small businesses. So, I mean, if you then look at how much these businesses contribute to the GDP, 46%, over 80% of employment, and they're just receiving 1% of total credit offered by commercial banks alone, I think that's something perhaps that needs to be looked at. And lastly, on the microfinance bank aspect, I mean, their claim to
Wilson, thank you. Can we please give Wilson a round of applause? Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm going to have to, let me just skip to you, Isaiah, right? And my plan before was to take 1 or 2 points from what Wilson said, but in the interest of time, I think we should just move straight. We just move to Isaiah. I think, Isaiah, for us, what we'd like to understand, I mean, you're doing great work at EFINA, and I think we would like to understand the financial needs of MSMEs a bit more. From a financial inclusion perspective, their ability or inability to be able to access finance, and also to particularly access financial services, for MSMEs. And great if you could just talk to us about that.
Thank you very much for having me. And I will try not to talk much about this.
2 minutes.
Yeah, anymore. But most importantly, when we talk about MSMEs or NMSMEs, we almost talk about them like they are a monolith, like it's just the same thing. And someone on the panel earlier actually tried to say, this is a very different group. $0 to $1 million is really different. So I'm going to try to focus on, let's think about the bottom of the pyramid, micro enterprises. And let's paint a picture that can help us really well. Over 90% of these businesses are not registered. Over 90% of them are not insured. You know what that means, literally? They may not be able to withstand any form of shock, like any form of shock. Flood happened recently, COVID-19 happened. Many of them are not able to survive these things. Now, a lot of times when we also talk about these businesses or the business owners, we are even thinking about they can't access finance because the requirement or the institutional barriers are really quite high. They almost ask for your grandfather's death certificate and so many things. But what about many of these businesses that don't even know where to go to access finance? Yeah. And Wilson talked about the fact that many of these businesses even just have access to 1% of the share. But if you think about the numbers in terms of what they recruit, you see that it's a huge opportunity. And when you now think about what are the biggest pain points from where they need to operate to paying their staff, which is a very big issue, to issues related to competence, and then when you talk about business paying for operations and the ability of the business to pay for research and development, they can't afford it. Yeah. And many of these businesses need to be able to do a lot of research and development to even be able to consider the opportunity to thrive or survive. But many of these businesses can afford it. Then if you go into maybe some SMEs that would also work with equipment, that's also funding equipment is also big issues. And also it's important that when we talk about MSMEs and MSMEs and all of these things, it's important that we do not see Nigeria as just one picture and we give this percentage as Nigeria. Business MSMEs today accessing loans, grants and everything, 8% of all of them across Nigeria come from Lagos. States like Taraba take 0.something%. The next to that, I think, is Rivers, which is about 4% or so, which means it's half of what Lagos is in percentage. By the time you go down north, you realize that when we think about the bottom line principle of sustainable development goal to leave no one behind, it's genuinely leaving a lot of MSMEs behind. I'll stop at that and we can.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much, Isaiah. And I think that that's very important because that sort of aligns with what Wilson had said in terms of the number of people that are even able to access finance. So when we say 65% of people accessed finance, even with that level, we see that the major source of finance that they access was their personal savings and loans. So really, are people really having that much access to finance? Thank you very much. I think it's important to also understand that, and I know that Dr. Salami mentioned it, and if you turn to page 30 of our access to the finance gap for Nigerian entrepreneurs, we do highlight a number of current initiatives that have been put in place by the federal government in relation to providing finance. And I know we're out of time. I'm just going to read very quickly, just so that, just to paint the picture, so that you do know that in this landscape of funding gap problems and issues, it's not like the government is not doing anything at all. I mean, and the narrative mustn't be that there's all of this and the government isn't doing anything. So yes, we've seen that there's been direct lending. CBN has put in different funds, micro, small and medium enterprise development funds. We're seeing federal government special intervention for MSMEs, BOI and government of Kano states, 2 billion micro, small, and medium enterprises development fund. We've seen the Anchor Borrowers program, which gained a lot of popularity actually, because it targeted small farmers in cooperatives and medium to large scale farmers and provided quite a lot of funding. We've also seen youth entrepreneurship development programs. We've seen SMEDAN funding. And I guess the question for us is, okay, there's just so much, it just seems a lot, right? And yet Amaka still talked about its 22 trillion Naira funding gap. I think let's talk to Teju from Lagos State. Because we also know that Lagos State as well has also put in place current initiatives. I think, Teju, maybe you just talk to us a little bit about the current initiatives so that even SMEs who are listening to this can also sort of understand what are the current initiatives first, before we start talking about impact assessment, as Dr. Salami has told us to do. But what's available today?
Okay, thank you again, Shay. First, to the Faith Foundation for having us, and again, it's a privilege. One thing I'd like to emphasize is what the Lagos State Employment Trust Fund is not a bank. It's set up for one thing, growth of MSMEs so that they can create jobs.
Absolutely.
And that's why I need to say that, look, the work Faith Foundation is doing is extremely important, even as we talk about access to finance. What is important is what is the reason we're saying this business should access this finance? And that's what we at LSETF are here to plug, and that is increased productivity. So we currently do this by making sure there's access to affordable financing for the growth of these businesses. We don't do commercial rate. And the idea is that we don't want the businesses working for the banks. We want them to work so they can plug back money and then they can grow and employ more people. So we do this by providing generic credit facility to businesses at single digits, 9%, is non-collateralized. And this is extremely important to mention again, because when you hear the limitations, this is one of the big factors that is limiting these businesses. We've been able to do our access to credit also working with the commercial banks. So we're sharing risk, Jonathan. And the idea for us is we're blending the financing with the commercial banks. So the government brings in subsidized funding. so the loans can still go out to customers at lower interest rates. We're also doing this in partnership with local government level, so that businesses in an ecosystem are also encouraged to access this financing and use it to grow. We provide, part of our structure is also connecting startups and businesses to investors. So we also sometimes get that request for, we're looking at businesses in a particular sector. Do you have beneficiaries that are looking for money in that space? But not to forget, there's a space for grants. I like what what Isaiah said around some businesses are not able to recover from shocks. So there's a space for grants that the government can cover. And LSETF has been able to do this, or the Lagos State government has been able to do this, successfully working with partners, both the commercial banks with people like Faith Foundation, to be able to provide grant funding to MSMEs. First during NSAS, and then secondly, of course, during also after COVID lockdown, because COVID issues are not yet over. But the idea for us is when you think about employment all the time, what will drive it? And we're trying to make sure that we can increase or enable small and medium enterprises to create employment. We're not disrupting the market. I need to be clear about this. The idea for us is the current structures are not going to work at the bottom of the pyramid. We want to lift them up. We want Mama Sikira's Akara business to become a household name and a brand. And she's not going to be able to do that if she's only going to be looking to the banks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think we like single-digit interest rates. And I think that's what, I think Toyin mentioned that, right? So yes, let's get into that. 9. So that's the 9.99 fad. Thank you very much. Yvonne, I'm going to come to you. And we've talked a lot about the role of fintech. And I don't think that we can, overemphasize the role of fintech in relation to financial inclusion and the impact of technology in relation to financial inclusion and just access to financial services. I think you can talk to us a little bit more about that and the role that fintech is playing for that purpose.
Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me. And again, congratulations to Faith on this. I'm a very big fan of the organization and the good work they're doing. So just three things, right? The first is that it's not just fintechs, and I'll talk about this. There's actually a set of technology startups in general, just to your points, that are really leveraging technology, in addressing a lot of the needs that the MSMEs have, and eventually, setting them up to getting finance. And the second thing is just really talking about these fintechs. So number one, these technology startups, right? So number one, if we look at retail trade, for example, we know how informal it is, right? From the manufacturer, from the manufacturer down to our homes, right? It's very informal. And there is a set of technology startups that have worked to digitize that supply chain. So working with the manufacturers, working with the key distributors, to be able to improve distribution, and trade for these retail traders, right? And a lot of the early indications are pointing to improved profitability, right? For these informal traders, which are, they squarely fall into the MSME buckets. At the very basic, it's a WhatsApp channel for somebody to be able to reorder their goods, right? Because that day that she mostly has to go to the bank to pay for the goods and then, come back, it's a cost on them, right? And then, Ms. Bakary talked about supplier finance, because what these technology startups are now doing is layering on embedded finance, right? Because if I am a manufacturer, right, and I see the data, because that's what technology allows you to do, right? You see the data and see that this lady in this market is able to turn over, a carton, a case, a week faster than the next person. They are more incentivized to provide that supplier finance, right? And then that starts to get into that whole idea of access to finance. So again, there is a set of technology startups doing that. Another set of technology startups is just really helping them to digitize their business operations, inventory management, invoicing, all of that kind of stuff. Again, eventually they're going to lay on, embedded finance, because once you start to digitize that. The last part of my answer to your question, then now start to talk about fintechs in particular. Peggy talked about it, about, being able to leverage data. And then there is a set of fintechs. What they're doing really is sitting now and saying that, look, let's aggregate all these data points, right? Whether it's bank accounts data, whether it's telco data, whether it's, airtime borrowing data. And what they're able to do is aggregate all of that, apply technology to it to create a risk profile on these businesses, right? And then what they're able to do is that, because everybody has a history, there's a financial history, there's, all of that. And the idea is that you aggregate all of that, apply technology to be able to say, look, this person is not as risky as you claim they are, right? Again, that starts to get into, improving access to finance for them. And what you'll find, last, what you'll find is that even these fintechs, a lot of them are actually getting, credit lines from the banks, to do this work, right? So the banks are saying that, okay, look, you know what, I don't know how to assess the risk profile, but if you can do it, here's a credit line to be able to do that.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that, so that even the traditional financial institutions are not left out. With collaboration, with digital innovation, access to finance can be made better, efficient systems and just faster. I think we talked a bit about the funding problem. Let's go into the policy issues, which is understanding the sustainable policy approach to then bridging this access to finance gap. I think first things first, Isaiah, I think I'm going to come to you. Let's talk about what are the enablers for policy reform. Maybe you can talk to us a little around that, particularly in respect to access to finance. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think one of the most important things when we think about policy is data, evidence. We cannot re-overemphasize the role of data in the place of making informed policy. It's very important. And as much as we collect data, we should also consider contextual realities. That's very important, because the reality of the Mama Lakara she talked about in Lagos is different from the reality of the same Mama Lakara in Delta and in Kaduna or in Maiduguri. It's different. But how does our policy, how do we make sure, especially when we're talking about policies at national level, how do we make sure that they are adaptable to the reality of people? And we should also be aware of something. Policymakers, implementers, operators, at EFINA, we like to refer to ourselves as honest brokers, which means we are good friends of all the parties. I don't know if that's a good position to be, but we try to do it. One thing that we also cannot ignore is the place of technology. For a long time, regulators catch up with technology. That's the way it is in Nigeria. Fintech people would have gone this high, and then the regulators start saying, oh yeah, you have to do this now so that this doesn't happen and everything like that. But we need to be on the same page. We need to create conducive platform for operators, for a micro enterprise to thrive through policy making. And that involves regulatory sandboxes. I know the SEC tried out regulatory sandbox, how effectively that is working. I don't think there's an evaluation on that yet, but there's an opportunity also for CBN to do that in terms of access to finance for MSMEs in Nigeria, and see how that can drive things to a large extent. And when we also think about policies around digital or anything related to consumer protection, we like to think about it as individuals, but it's important to protect MSMEs, nano MSMEs, and whatever it is, in terms of seeing them as from the demand side and protect them significantly. That's very important. We know what happened in the first 3 months of PSB licensing in Nigeria. And our data doesn't look good on the uptake of mobile money in Nigeria. Why? There are huge opportunities for mobile money in the country, but in terms of the uptake since this started, it's like not looking really, really good in terms of the data from our side. And also from the, if you also think about how the collaboration between regulators and MSMEs in terms of consultation during policy making, you see that there is a huge gap. We need to consider all of this as part of a human-centered design process in policy making. So all of this has to be strongly considered as we talk about. And earlier, Peggy talked about the opportunity with credit bureau. We can overemphasize that unique IDs to be able to track people. We cannot overemphasize all of this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Data, technology, information, infrastructure, make sure all of these things are in place. These themselves are policy reform enablers. Thank you very much. I think that in talking about this, Jonathan, I'm going to reach out to you because there was something you talked about in your presentation. And when we think about it, if we have data from Sweden that tells us that about 96.7%, small businesses account for about 96% of total businesses in Nigeria, then the importance of sustainable finance and the green transition for SMEs is critical. You know, in Nigeria, we like to tell ourselves that, you know, God knows that we have so many problems and natural disasters don't appear to be one of the things that we deal with. But, you know, this year, we started to witness an unprecedented flooding, you know, in Nigeria. And God bless the souls of people, you know, who died, people who lost businesses, income, and all of that. So we can't keep on having that narrative. We do need to follow the world as we move on to this journey to net zero. And, you know, for an SME company, you know, they're thinking to themselves, really, what do you mean about, what are you talking about net zero? What are you talking about sustainable finance or climate finance? Go and meet the oil and gas companies and then start dealing with what they need to deal with there. So for SME companies, I like that you talked about sustainable finance, green transition. If SME companies constitute that much of total businesses in Nigeria, then we need to be educated, you know, about it. And even the financiers who provide financing to SMEs must also know how to channel this finance in such a way that also, you know, encourages them to also participate in, you know, sustainable finance. So please, I'd like for you to just kind of touch around that and talk to us about that. And to the SMEs, you know, who are going to listen to this or who are listening to this, thank you.
Thank you. Yes. There's no transition without SMEs. There will be no transition without SMEs. That's key. Now, the context is that it's in the interests of SMEs to do the transition to net zero. There's growth opportunities there, new products and services, but also greening that increases their efficiency, that reduces their cost. So that's the first thing. We have to increase the awareness of SMEs about the benefits of greening and of the steps that they need to take. The other thing is that large firms at the head of the value chain, you know, they're being pressed to report on ESG, you know, environmental, social, governance performance. And so to deal with large firms, you need to, in their value chain, you need to be greening yourself. The financial institutions are being pressed to report on the environmental performance of their portfolios. So, you know, this ESG reporting could be another driver of greening of SMEs. But SMEs are not subject generally to reporting requirements on their non-financial performance, something that they could do voluntarily, but it's not really taking off yet. And so we need to trigger this. There are sort of supply side measures that governments could take to promote SME greening. The most common thing is public loans for SMEs, often public financial institutions that provide loans to businesses for financial projects. Equity, you know, there's new venture capital funds, green equity funds. They monitor and they monitor their performance. They get involved in the governance of the enterprise. That can promote green entrepreneurship for the innovative startups. You've got grants, green grants. Ireland has the Green Plus grants, 50% of the cost up to 100,000 euros of implementing your company's climate plan comes as a grant. Guarantees. The company needs to show that the loan that they're being guaranteed for is contributing to a green initiative. But then you need the supply, you need the demand measures too. And there's really two parts. One is the online hubs that you get with tools and resources to help SMEs to understand and to measure. So the Danish Business Authority has a digital carbon footprint calculator for SMEs. That sort of thing. The other part of it is the advice and consultancy, business development services. The Industrial Bank of Korea has got a team of dedicated ESG consultants who provide free advice to SMEs on upgrading their business strategy as a whole through ESG. The ESG Doctor for SMEs is called. Last thing is regulations. It's going to be very important to start to put pressure on the large firms, on the financial institutions, on environmental performance. But you do need to define what a green project is, you know, what a green business is. Now you need methodologies. There's a proliferation of them. It's becoming very complicated. It would be good to make use of some international standards. Organizations like OECD can help on that front.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you. Thank you. And so I guess on the demand side, education, awareness. On the supply side, in providing finance as well, also set about standards that, you know, SME companies would need to comply with in order to be able to have access to sustainable finance. Thank you. Thank you very much. Our time is fast spent. I would like to have one last round with our panelists, but our time is fast spent. So I'm just going to ask one impact assessment. You know, that's if there's anything that we go back home with, you know, I think Dr. Salami stressed it, you know, impact assessment. Funds must, whether from the financial services perspective or whether from the government perspective, you know, you must take stock. You must look at what you've done and how what you are doing is actually making impacts. From a corporate perspective, you must even ask yourself whether, even if you think you're growing, whether you're actually growing profitably as well. So impact is just talk to us one line impact, and then for Yvonne, one line as well. Policies in relation to fintech or technology. What do you think the government should be doing better? Or what do you think what are the kind of policy instruments or you'd like to suggest in relation to technology? So let's do that one. Yes, sir. Okay. Okay, not one line. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. So I think from our perspective, what I mentioned about the work Faith Foundation is doing is that when you think about capacity development in addition to access to finance, and how I remember last year, the Faith Foundation came back and talked about the alumni from the LSETF beneficiaries that had gone through the Faith Foundation program and had expanded. And it was just a segment of our beneficiaries, but our own impact assessment showed us that 72% of people that had accessed the funding had employed more people. They had grown their business line. Even 80% of people that accessed the grants. After we did the first round of the grants, we had in collaboration with TechnoServe, or funded by Citibank, 80% of the people that received the grant actually said if they didn't get that grant, they would have closed up shop. So it did tell us that the intervention was timely, it was relevant, and it was extremely important. What we found very important for the success of what we do is, first, in partnership with NACCIMA, for example, we created a credit analysis model where people can go online to apply for the programs and they don't have a name, they only have an ID. And they immediately will generate a score. But we're also doing it working with the CRC. So Peggy's left now, but there's also an element that is plugged into the CRC that gives us that information. And up front, they will get a score. Now, if they don't meet the score and they feel they still want to understand why they didn't, then they go for a risk-based assessment, which then includes more information from the business directly. I've mentioned capacity development, monitoring repayments. Today, I can tell you how many people are not repaying our loans today. If I need to, I just need to generate the report. It's constant, is real time, is instant, because that way we know who to follow up with immediately. And of course, instead of collateral, we still use guarantors. So we use your social collateral. So rather than ask you to bring property, we would talk to you to bring a guarantor. I think there are many things that definitely there are models that we can change. We tried the guarantee, but the banks wanted cash collateral. We tried, but there's still many things that I feel the commercial banks can come in here so that we can increase the pool of funds that will be accessible at subsidized rates without limiting the structure or the approach to providing this access to banks. We will continue to leverage the government funds to make sure that we can get more funding accessible to the MSMEs. But we cannot underestimate capacity development, what technology would do. My chairman is here, and since she came on board, it helped us to see more processes that we could integrate, like Okra, my bank statement, things that could provide information to us directly. Of course, monitoring repayments, using existing structures that are managed, run by the private sector, like the CRC. And of course, using other forms of guarantee rather than physical guarantee. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I think we should give a round of applause to LSETF, yeah, for the fantastic work that they're doing.
Hey, so today we're supposed to already be at 50 billion, but I think we're currently at 21 billion. We've gotten 16 billion from government. We've leveraged it by 5 billion. We have partnerships with Access Bank, Polaris Bank, Edfin Microfinance Bank that we actually use to double what we have. That's what we've done so far, sir. We've also, why 9%? You asked that question earlier, and I wanted to mention that it's also around sustainability. So we were very subsidized, but we realized that we were going to sink the fund. We needed to remain affordable, but we needed to do it in a sustainable structure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So Yvonne.
Thank you. So on the policy side, the CBN recently released an open banking policy, and it's about 4 or 5 years in the works. And it's something that globally has actually been a trend when you talk about kind of, policy that actually directly, impacts kind of fintechs and some of the work that they do. I mean, what that means is, and we've had the discussion earlier about data, right? Everybody has a history, right? Whether it's the financial history, whether it's like I talked about, somebody that is in retail value chain and you have their history of reorder levels and things like that, right? And so what the open banking policy allows people to do is to say that, look, an MSME can present themselves, and with their consent, of course, right? Because when you're talking about people's data, it have to be done in a secure manner. With their consent, you can then electronically pull that data, whether it's the bank statement data. And one of the innovators just specify, okay, your credit bureau way that if a retailer wants to come and say, look, this is somebody that's been buying from me and so often, right? Or, this is somebody that borrows airtime and this is their repayment behavior. And so in a secure manner, you can pull that data And then fintechs like I talked about that are using technology to be able to aggregate this data and generate a profile can then do that. And this is all digitized. This is all in real time, right? So that's one of the policy that, like I said, it's about 4 years in the making. And I really think that as it starts to become, commercialized, for lack of a better word, and people start to know about it, it really become transformative, right? Because like I said, everybody has some sort of a history. It's just to say that, look, this is who I am. I mean, Ms. Bakary talked about credibility and this is who I am, this is what I've done. And from the science perspective, from the data science perspective, it's already been proven that all of these data sources, both the traditional financial data and alternative data, are good indicators of somebody's risk profile.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Lastly, Mr. Diola, you've given us some one round. So, but there's someone online that needs to have one round too, and that's Wilson. Wilson.
I'll keep it short. I'll try to keep it short.
Wilson, you have 1 minute for real this time. And I guess just to highlight from our reports, some of the policy recommendations from our reports in relation to access to finance. Thank you. Wilson, please, just from our reports, what are the policy recommendations that the Faith Institute has also put out there?
Yeah, so one of the key things that was highlighted is the need to ensure synergy, collaboration, particularly looking at all of the different government interventions, and also ensure that M&E, can be instituted into the design of some of these programs, and also, effected as the programs go on. The other thing is also on the need to decentralize this, credit guarantee schemes for SMEs and look at what are the state governments doing. Oftentimes, there's a lot of focus on the federal government, and the LSETF, provides a very good example of what can work and what state government can do. I mean, some of these things need to be, allocated made provided for in the state budget, and also ensure that, we conduct monitoring and evaluation. And finally is also the need to intensify the adoption of the NMSME's credit risk database. And we cited the example of Japan, how they've been able to make use of this. And more importantly, when we were having the stakeholders session we had, we found out that, some of the credit bureaus, cited that there's quite a reluctance from financial institutions to share credit information, and also to use their API interface, platform. So we think there's need for, stakeholders to interact, perhaps design frameworks of collaboration, and this must be built on trust and mutual understanding. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Wilson. Thank you very much. And this is a round of applause to our wonderful panel. Thank you so much.
Please, another round of applause for our panel. Thank you very much. And it's interesting to see that there, even amongst them, there's collaboration that has already been happening. One of the good things about our policy dialogue is that it helps inform our policy workshops that happen during the year. So this year we started, because there are a lot of conversations we have that are very difficult. There are things we then have to take in a bit more granular. And so we have quarterly policy workshops that we then have people who are policy and program managers then do design session. And I think it's clear to me that in our quarterly workshops for next year, we would need to look at data mapping and M&E. We need to look at technology and just creating interactive platforms. And there's also the conversation around communication and awareness, because a lot of tools are also available and initiatives are available, but people do not know, or the people that should know about them do not know about them. So we will communicate to you as all of those that are here, and additional people who are not already in our database, on our policy workshops that will start in 2023. So that's what next. The other thing we also do, because some of these conversations happen at advocacy level, And for those of you who don't know, Faith Foundation is the lead facilitator at the Nigerian Economic Summit Group for the MSME community of practice. And so we don't do this as a talk shop. There are one or two conversations that we've had over the years, including tax, made in Nigeria goods, that we then work with other players. This is the part of Faith Foundation that does not look at us just as Faith entrepreneurs, but we work with enterprise development organizations and everybody in the ecosystem across Nigeria who work with entrepreneurs. So we take a larger view approach to it. So if you're not a member of our MSME community of practice that we facilitate with the Nigerian Economic Summit Group, we would like you to join us. And that's where we do advocacy work. And then last thing is, please don't forget to download the reports on our program cards. They're at the back. There are two of the reports that are there. So please take a picture of the QR code using your phone camera, and then it'll take you directly to the link. As we round up, I would really like to appreciate all our panelists and our keynote speakers virtually in person. It's been 3 hours, but we've had quite a lot of insightful conversations. 3 hours, 15 minutes. Thank you, sir. And we do apologize for running over time. I thank our chairman and our current board of director members, some of who are here. I know Mr. Yinka is online, and also some of our immediate past board members, including the chairman of EcoBank and Engineer Bayo Adiola. Thank you very much for joining. We appreciate very much our host, EcoBank Nigeria. The managing director, Mr. Bolaji Lawal, was with us very briefly. And I have to acknowledge Mr. Jide Shipe, who was really the person that held us and made sure everything and our experience today went very well. There are quite a lot of people across. I won't be able to name names, but we have the DG of the LCCI who was here. That's the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. We had the DG of the Association of Business Organizations of Nigeria. We have the director for SMIDAN here. And then we even had quite a number of heads of SME funds in at least 7 banks here. We also have a few people who also manage innovation and impact funds who also came also here. And then we also have quite a lot of organizations like Wave Junior Achievement, who also support different segments of entrepreneurs across different levels. So thank you very much. And then last but not the least, to the Bank of Industry, who also supported our research and our policy work. Today is their budget defense day. So the MD sent his sincere apologies because they just could not, he couldn't attend today. Thank you to our attendees here. Thank you for joining and being part of our conversation today. We have a nice cocktail downstairs, and then we also have a nice gallery view of some very good artwork that the EcoBank team has asked us to join us with. Once you go out by the elevator, some of our team members will also direct you downstairs, but it's to the right of the reception lobby. Once again, my name is Adenike Adeyemi, and on behalf of Faith Foundation, we would like to appreciate you for your presence at our 8th Policy Dialogue. And I would like to appreciate the Faith Institute team and the Faith Foundation team who have done all the work that we are acknowledging today. Thank you very much. Thank you, Amaka. Thank you, Tife, Oyebola, David, and the entire team. Thank you so much. Have a good afternoon, everyone. Thank you.